I must have been around 7 years old when Grandma told me about the special knock. I was tucked up in bed at my parents' first house, in my little room at the back. At the time, Grandma was perched by my feet. I'd been crying. I don't know what upset me, but I remember my eyes blurring and my nose running. I remember probing a cut in my lip, touching it over and over again with my tongue. I remember the frown on Grandma's face, a look that was half concern, half something else. After she grabbed a tissue for me and wiped my face, she got up and walked away from the bed, wandered over to the cupboard on the opposite side of my room. I remember that cupboard well. Before we moved to our second home, that cupboard was the source of many sleepless nights for me, many nightmares. I used to imagine all sorts of things about it. I'd lie awake, sometimes for hours, and I'd have to keep peeking my eyes open to check the cupboard door was still closed, to make sure it was shut tight. See, whenever my eyes were closed and I heard a creak somewhere in the house, I'd imagine it was the cupboard door, that something on the far side was trying to open it, ever so softly, so it could come and get me while I slept. I'd never told anyone about this fear. Even at 7 years old, I knew it was stupid, baby stuff, but as I watched my grandma stop in front of the cupboard and lean a wrinkled cheek against the door, I felt myself growing tense all the same. Even though the lights were on, even though there was an adult in the room with me. And when my grandma closed her eyes and started whispering, I had to fight back the urge to shout for my parents. "Grandma?" I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. "Grandma, what are you doing?" For a few seconds, she didn't respond. She kept her eyes closed and kept muttering. Then, abruptly, she turned to face me again, smiled, and when she came back and resumed her usual position at the foot of my bed, I knew it was story time. "Did I ever tell you about the special knock, sweetheart?" I shook my head. "No? Well, maybe I was waiting until you were a bit older. The special knock can be wonderful. It can lead you to see things you wouldn't even be able to conjure up in dreams, but can also be, well, dangerous." Grandma glanced away from me, towards the bedroom door. "Maybe it's one for another time. In fact, I really should be getting home to see your grandfather, and I wouldn't want to scare you." She started to get up from the bed, but I stopped her. "No, don't go, Grandma. What's the special knock?" Grandma's blue eyes twinkled. She hovered where she was for a moment, then sat back down. "The special knock is an old trick a friend of mine taught me when I was younger," she began. "Not everyone can do it, and not everyone would want to do it. You have to be brave and careful and, well, special." Grandma smiled at me. "Like you." As I watched her, she reached into the front pocket of her cardigan and pulled out 2 boiled sweets, passed one to me. I had already brushed my teeth, and I knew Mum would kill me if she caught me eating sweets before bed. But this was my time alone with Grandma. Mum was downstairs with Dad. She'd never know. I unwrapped the sweet and popped it in my mouth, feeling the sticky mint wash over my tongue. The cut in my lips stung slightly, but I ignored it. When Grandma next spoke, she lowered her voice. "When I was over by your cupboard door just now, I was using the magic words, secret words that only a few other people know. Do you know what those words do?" I shook my head. "They turn a door into a window, a sort of gateway. The thing is, sweetheart, this place you spend your days in, this house where you live, and the building you go to school in, and the town you visit with your mother at the weekends, it's not the only place. There are other places too. And if you use the special knock on that cupboard door of yours, now that I've whispered the magic words to it, you'll see them. You'll be able to see the other places for yourself." I stared at Grandma, concentrating on her words, absorbing them. Mint flooded my mouth, but I forgot to swallow. "Now, listen to me very carefully," Grandma continued, "because this is the important bit. The way you open the window is by doing the special knock, but you have to get it right. 7 knocks on the door. That's what you want. 7 knocks, no more, no less. Then you open it. You won't be able to step through, but you'll have one heck of a view, all right?" I swallowed. "A view of what?" "I don't know its real name, but the woman who taught me the special knock had her own name for it. She called it the lunar plane. 7 knocks takes you to the lunar plane. I could try and describe it to you, sweetheart, but I honestly don't think I could do it justice. You just have to see it for yourself. All I can say is it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life, and trust me, I've seen plenty." Grandma plucked the sweets wrapper from the duvet, then put them in her pocket. She put her hands on her legs as if bracing herself to stand. Then she paused. "How many knocks did I say?" "7, Grandma." "That's right, 7. And don't forget it either. If you get the number wrong and then open the door..." She glanced across the cupboard and frowned. "Well, just make sure you don't get the wrong number, okay?" "Okay, Grandma. And will you make me a promise?" "What?" "If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13 or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door, okay? Don't open it, no matter what you hear on the other side. The last thing you want is to open a gateway to the Blacklands." I felt icy fingers down my back. I glanced across the closed cupboard door, in the shadows at the far end of my bedroom. "What's the Blacklands?" Grandma stood up and wandered over to me, leaned down, and gave me a kiss. "You don't want to know," she whispered. I spent the next week avoiding the cupboard. I didn't go anywhere near it. I tried not to even look in its direction. Did my best to push Grandma's story as far out of my mind as I could. It wasn't easy. Whenever I was alone in my room and the house was silent, I'd feel it. A sort of pull. Like when someone tells you not to look at something, and suddenly, all you want to do is take a quick peek. The feeling was sort of like that, but it was different too. Stronger. Sometimes when I was lying in bed at night, I'd feel the cupboard almost like a weight in my mind. A heavy, static energy. It made me restless, made me want to scrunch up my fists and grip my teeth. When I turned away from the cupboard, my skin itched, like the paws had tiny, invisible bugs in them. It made it hard for me to sleep. And when I did sleep, I had dreams. Sometimes the dreams were pleasant, floaty ones. I dreamed I was on a cloud, hovering through multicolored planes of light, flying through an endless sea of stars. I'd wake from these dreams, feeling happy and safe, like how I felt when Mom hugged me and stroked my hair. But other times, I had nightmares. The nightmares I had during that week were the worst I ever remembered having in my life. Horrible, half-glimpsed blurs, images I'd wake from with a scream lodged in my throat, my sweat-soaked pajamas sticking to the skin of my back. At the time, I didn't remember the nightmares themselves, at least not completely. But every time I woke from one, I was left with the same fading image, an image of myself surrounded by thick, choking blackness, dense shadows everywhere. I couldn't see a thing, but I had the sense that I was standing at the center of a vast open space. Wind howled around me, sounds echoed, I wanted to open my mouth and yell for help, but I couldn't bring myself to. Because I knew I wasn't alone. It was a week after Grandma's story that I used the special knock. It was a Saturday night, and my friend from school, Tim Jacobs, was around. We were having a sleepover. It's been a long time since I last saw Tim, but I can still picture him. Even though he was a month younger than me, I always remember him looking older. A tall, broad-shouldered kid with green eyes and messy blonde hair, a half smirk permanently on his face. Tim was one of the most popular kids in our year, and in normal circumstances, he wouldn't have had anything to do with me. But our dads were friends from way back, and we'd known each other our whole lives. As Tim often liked to remind the kids at school, he was forced to hang out with me. "When are you going to get a TV in your room, or a computer?" Tim sat in his pajamas, slumped in the chair by my desk. He was fiddling with my desk lamp, switching it on and off. His face lit up with light, then disappeared, then lit up again. This wasn't the first time Tim had asked me a question like this. Whenever we had sleepovers at my house, he spent the whole time moaning about my lack of stuff. No TV, no computer, no PlayStation. I had board games, and I had books, but that was about it. And Tim had no interest in those things. "You know my mum won't let me," I muttered back. It was 10 p.m, and we were both speaking in half whispers. We'd been told to go to sleep at 9 p.m, and Mum had already been up to give us one warning for talking. I knew from past experience that one warning was all you wanted to get. Mum had a short fuse, and she wouldn't be above grounding me if I wasn't careful. I knew we were safe if we kept our voices low though. Mum and Dad were both downstairs in the lounge, watching TV. Some film. The faint, tinny sound of laughter drifted upstairs every now and then. As long as we weren't too loud, they wouldn't hear us. I glanced warily at Tim, who was still fiddling with a lamp. He was in a restless mood. He'd been silent and sullen most of the evening, rolling his eyes whenever I suggested stuff for us to do. Bad signs. From knowing him so long, I knew he could get reckless when he was bored. Reckless and mean. "You know what I think?" said Tim now, keeping his eyes on the lamp. He was talking slowly and carefully, punctuating his words with a flick of the lamp switch. "What I think," switch light, "is that your mum," switch dark, "is a prick," switch light. He put extra emphasis on the word, savouring the sound, the adultness of it. Then he stared across the room at me, fixing his green eyes on mine. I felt my own eyes prickle, and suddenly had to fight to hold back tears. I looked away from Tim, and my eyes found the cupboard. "I know what we could do," I said suddenly. Tim followed my gaze. "I'm not playing any more of your stupid board games," he said. "That's kid stuff." "No, this isn't board games. This is a secret I caught myself. "A secret someone showed me." "Yeah? What secret?" Tim's voice still had an edge to it, but at the same time, I could tell I'd caught his interest. This was my best tool when Tim was in a bad mood. Distraction. If I argued or disagreed with him, he'd only make fun of me more. But if I could get his mind on something else, I might be okay. "So, basically, there's this special knock someone taught me," I said now. "If I do a special knock on that cupboard door, then open it, we'll be able to see something really cool." Tim rolled his eyes. "Yeah, right. No, really. A witch taught me how to do it. She cast a spell on the door, and now I can take us anywhere we want to go just by knocking on it." Tim stood up from the chair by my desk. The lamplight spilled over his face. His expression was half smirk, half scowl. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," he said. "It's dumb, even for you. How about instead of knocking on the door, I knock on your head a bunch of times? How about that?" He took a step towards me, and I panicked. "Well, if you're too scared to try it, I'll understand." This was a big risk, and I knew it. But as soon as the words were out, Tim paused. "Why the hell would I be scared? I'm not scared of nothing." I shrugged. "Well, the spell the witch did is dangerous. Really dangerous. Like, if we get the number of knocks wrong, and I do more than I should, we could go someplace bad." Tim glanced across the cupboard door, then looked back at me. His face was hard to read. "Wait, how many times is it meant to be knocked then?" "7, I said quickly. "7 takes us to this awesome place. But the witch told me that if we get the knocks wrong, especially if we get close to 13 or something like that, then the door opens someplace different, someplace scary." Tim was no longer scowling. He looked across at the cupboard door again, a slight frown on his face. After a few more seconds, he shrugged his shoulders. "Okay, go on then. Let's try it." The brief wave of relief I felt was extinguished as soon as I turned up to the cupboard door. It stood a few feet away from me, just outside the glow of the desk lamp. In the shadows, it seemed stupid to think that the cupboard wasn't anything more than just a cupboard. Baby stuff. But then again, as I looked at it, I remembered the dreams I'd been having all week. The nightmares and Grandma's words from the previous weekend floated back to me. If you get the number wrong and then open the door. Grandma hadn't had a storytelling face on when she'd warned me about getting the number wrong. She'd had a serious face on. I was sure of it. As though she really meant what she was saying. And what was it she said about 13 knocks? If you do somehow knock the wrong number of times, especially if that number happens to be 13 or something close to it, then whatever you do, don't open the door, okay? Don't open it, no matter what you hear on the other side. I shivered. Still, that was alright, wasn't it? I'd just have to make sure I only knocked 7 times. I'd count as I went. Easy peasy. I pulled in a deep breath and stepped towards the cupboard. I felt Tim's eyes on me. From downstairs, at the edge of my hearing, I caught laughter floating up from the lounge. "It's okay," I told myself. "Your parents are just downstairs. And besides, nothing's really going to happen, is it? Grandma can't really turn doors magic." "Get on with it," said Tim. "If you're going to do your special needs knock or whatever the hell it is, then do it, okay? Don't just stand there." I ignored him. By now, I was directly in front of the cupboard door. I could feel that tingle again too, that pressure. Beneath my pajamas, my skin was all goosebumps. It might have been the slight chill in my bedroom, and nothing more than that. But then again, I knew it was more than that. I could feel it in my mind. A heaviness that was like the start of a headache, a pull behind my eyes. As I reached up and made my right hand into a fist, it felt like I was no longer in control of my body. Knock. I struck the wood with my fist, softly. The sound was dull and hollow. Knock. I felt Tim at the edge of my vision, moving up beside me. Knock. At first, I thought it was noise from the TV downstairs, but knock. Then I thought it might be coming from outside my bedroom window, and knock. Then it sounded as though it was all around me, and knock. Finally, as my fist struck the door for the 7th time, I realized what the sound was. A whistle. A faint, low hum coming from inside the cupboard. The echo of my final knock faded, melting into the noise beyond the door. My skin tingled. I stepped forwards, almost in a trance, my hand reaching for the doorknob. And then I felt myself shoved to one side as Tim pushed past me. Bang, 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 bang! Before I had a chance to stop him, or even so much as call out, Tim had thumped his fist against the door 6 more times, making the total number of knocks 13. Beyond the cupboard, the whistling sound stopped. Tim reached out and gripped the doorknob. Don't. My words were only a half whisper, but something in my voice made Tim pause. Still clutching the doorknob, he turned to look at me, and the grin on his face grew wider as he saw the fear in mine. When he next spoke, his voice was a parody of shock and concern. Oh no, did I get a special needs knock wrong? Did I make it all scary for poor Widow Christopher? Tim pouted out his lower lip. Is Widow Christopher scared of the big bad monsters in the cupboard? I listened for the whistling noise beyond the door, for any noise beyond the door, but could no longer hear anything. Don't open it, Tim. I'm serious. Oh, are you serious, are you? Okay, I didn't realise how serious you were. I wouldn't want you telling your mummy on me. Tim took his hand away from the door and rolled his eyes, turned away. I felt my body begin to untense, but just as I was turning away too, Tim spun back round and grabbed for the doorknob. Terror rolled through me in a sick wave. I turned just in time to see the cupboard door flying open. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound died in my throat when I saw what was on the other side. Nothing. Nothing at all. Just some clothes hanging up and toys littering the floor. The exact same view I had whenever I looked in the cupboard. Nothing else. Oh wow, the look on your face. I turned to see Tim with his hands on his knees, his body shaking with laughter. You look like you were going to wet yourself. Oh Chris, the guys at school are going to love this. I felt my cheeks burning. I turned away from Tim and stared into the shadows of the cupboard. I told myself I wouldn't cry. Told myself Tim would be gone in the morning anyway. I turned away from the cupboard and walked back across my room, towards my single bed. Where are you going? To sleep. Oh, what's wrong, Christopher? Did your special needs cupboard not work? Shut up. I was halfway across the room by that point, but when the cupboard door slammed shut behind me, I jumped. I looked back and saw Tim standing in front of it, staring after me, no longer laughing. What did you just say? Just leave me alone, Tim. I'm going to sleep and you should as well. If you keep banging around, Mum's going to hear you and then we'll both get grounded. Tim's frown deepened for a moment and then faded. He glanced towards the bedroom door. As he paused to listen, I knew he could hear what I heard. Footsteps on the stairs. The TV had gone off and my parents are getting ready for bed. Tim looked back at me and shrugged. But when he next spoke, he lowered his voice. Whatever, I'm bored anyway. There's never anything to do round here. He made his way over to his sleeping bag, which was set up near the bedroom door. I walked over to my desk and switched the lamp off, then made my own way to bed. I suddenly felt exhausted. As I clambered under the covers, I heard Tim's voice, a soft hiss in the darkness. Night-night, Christopher. Don't let the cupboard monsters bite. His laughter followed me into an uneasy sleep. It was a noise that woke me. A soft tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. I had a vision of Tim at my desk, tapping his fingers against the surface while he switched the lamp on and off. But when I creaked my eyes open, the room was still dark, and my desk chair was empty. Tap, 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 tap. I hadn't dreamt it. The sound was still there, constant and steady. Tap, 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 coming from the far side of the bedroom. Dread surged through my chest and stomach, forcing me fully awake. I lifted my head from my pillow, slowly, and peered into the shadows. Tim was standing in front of the cupboard, his back facing towards me, blonde hair sticking up in clumps, still messy from sleep. As I watched, he took a step closer to it, then another. Finally, he began to reach out a hand, as if in slow motion, for the cupboard's doorknob. "Tim," I spoke in a low hiss. "Tim, what are you doing?" He didn't react, just kept reaching his hand out, his fingertips now inches from the door. Tap, 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 tap. The sound was growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from inside the cupboard. As I kicked back the duvet and swung my legs out, Grandma's words raced through my mind. "Whatever you do, don't open the door. Don't open it no matter what you hear on the other side." "Tim!" I hissed his name again as my feet hit the carpet. He didn't react. From the way he was moving, I had the idea he might still be unconscious. Either that or in some sort of trance. Tap, 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 tap. Louder still. As I hurried across the room, Tim's fingertips found the doorknob. The tapping sound stopped. I skidded to a stop a few feet from where he stood, terror rooting me in place. "Tim, don't!" He half stirred. I saw his head move, turning slightly towards me. I caught a glimpse of one green eye, open but glazed. Then, Tim tugged the door open. The hinges squealed as it moved. Tim hadn't put much force behind his pull, so the door creaked open slowly, and it didn't open all the way, only about a foot. But that was enough. It was enough for me to glimpse the swirling, ink-thick blackness beyond. The darkness that was far too dense to be explained away with shadows. It was enough for me to hear the distant howling, like storm wind battering the eaves of a dilapidated house. And it was enough for me to feel a sense of dread that was worse than anything I'd ever felt before in my life. "Tim! Tim, wake up!" My voice wasn't any louder, but this time it seemed to get through. Tim let go of the doorknob. He turned towards me. I saw him blink rapidly, saw the glazed look leave his face. For a second, his green eyes found mine. He opened his mouth to say something, and then long fingers stretched from the cupboard and found his throat. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I could only stare on in shock as the fingers wrapped themselves around his neck. Guh. Tim tried to speak, but he couldn't. He could only make the same strangled noise, like a baby struggling to make itself understood. Guh. I listened to that noise in horror, still rooted to the spot. Time was moving impossibly slow. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place on the carpet. I only know it was long enough for me to get a clear view of those fingers, which were like a cross between tree branches and tentacles, tightening on Tim's throat. Long enough for me to see his strained face turning from red to purple, to watch as the veins in his forehead stood out like worms beneath his skin. Long enough for me to see him stretching out a hand towards me, the fingers flailing in my direction, while the terror grew on his face. That was what finally snatched me out of my shock. Tim's hand. Something about seeing Tim, a kid who dominated playgrounds and sports fields for as long as I'd known him, reaching out towards me with desperation in his eyes. Without pausing to think what I was doing, I ran forwards and grabbed him. I grabbed his hand. For just a second, I felt his grip tightening on mine. Wind howled in the direction, my eyes locked on Tim's. And then, with the force of a plaster being ripped off a cut, Tim was snatched backwards. 1 minute he was holding my hands, the next he'd vanished. I had a brief impression of him flying through the air, screaming as he was pulled through the dark gap in the cupboard's door. Then, he was gone, his cries swallowed by the distant wind. I stared down at my empty cupboard, too many emotions raging through me to process, and only looked up again when I heard the crash of the cupboard door banging shut. By the time I heard footsteps and voices on the landing beyond my room, I'd started to cry. Tim was never seen again, gone without a trace. When my parents first came into my bedroom that night, they thought it was all a game. Hide and seek got out of hand. I kept telling them Tim was in the cupboard, but whenever my dad opened it to check, he couldn't find anything. Just the same old pile of clothes and toys. Later, when the police came, I told them the same thing I'd eventually told my parents, that I'd seen something grab Tim and pull him into the cupboard, a hand that came from the darkness and wrapped itself around his neck. None of them believed me. Why would they have? Looking back, I can see myself through their eyes, just an upset, terrified little kid whose friend had gone missing. Maybe they thought I had a nightmare, or maybe they thought I had seen something, an abductor pulling Tim through the bedroom window perhaps, but my frightened mind had simply confused the details. Either way, whenever I mentioned the cupboard, they dismissed it. There was only one person who didn't. We were already in our new home when I next saw Grandma, our second one, a few towns over. At the time, I hadn't really understood why we were moving. I had overheard Dad telling Mum that the talking would never stop if we didn't leave, but I hadn't really got what he meant. I didn't care though. Moving meant I could go to a new school and get away from all the whispering kids in the playground. It also meant I'd never have to see Tim's mum, who turned up outside the school gates one day to scream questions at me again. But mostly, it meant I could get away from the cupboard. It meant I could sleep. My parents had eventually set up my bed in the spare room when I refused to step back in my own bedroom, but even that hadn't helped. Not really, because I knew it was still in there. I could still feel it. The thought of that cupboard was like a horrible itch in my mind. I kept wanting to scratch at it, but that only made it worse. Moving house got me far away from it, once and for all. A couple weeks after we'd moved, I finally saw Grandma. I'd been asking Mum and Dad if I could see her ever since the night Tim disappeared, but they kept putting me off. Said it wasn't the right time. I could see Grandma once everything was more settled. But finally, after our furniture was moved in and they grew fed up with my pestering, I got my wish. Grandma came round for the evening, and at bedtime, I asked if she could come up to tuck me in. She agreed. The second the door to my new room was shut, I started babbling, telling her about the cupboard door and the special knock, about how we knocked 13 times, about what happened to Tim. She listened at first, but as I grew more and more worked up, she finally came over and started stroking my hair. "Shh, shush, sweetheart," Grandma whispered. "It's okay. It's going to be okay. Shh, you're safe now. But can the thing in the cupboard find me here?" "What? No, you don't need to worry about anything in the cupboard. The magic words only work once, and I don't have to use them again if you don't want me to. It means you're safe from him." "From who?" "From the boy who was bullying you, sweetheart. From Timothy." Grandma smiled and stroked my cheek. "You're friends in the Blacklands now." The temperature in my room was warm, but my skin suddenly felt cold. I stared up at Grandma. What do you mean?" She sighed. Don't you remember when I last came to see you and I tucked you in? You'd been crying and had a cut lip, and before I told you about the special knock, you told me that your friend, a boy called Timothy, had tripped you up on the playground. You said he did it in front of the girls in your class, and they'd all laughed at you. I stared at Grandma, thought back to the last time I'd seen her. I remembered the feeling of having cried recently, and remembered the cut in my lip. Remembered probing at it with my tongue while Grandma spoke. But I couldn't remember telling her about Tim tripping me. Tim was... I grasped for the right words and came up short. Tim's my friend, Grandma. Well, I'll tell you something for free, sweetheart. Anyone who hurts you and makes themselves feel bigger is not your friend. Grandma frowned for a second, then smiled again. But, like I said, you don't need to worry about him anymore. Timothy's in the Blacklands, and he'll never get out. Grandma leaned down towards me. Her breath smelled like sweet and mint. I can't have anyone hurting my Christopher, can I? Now, give your grandma a big kiss and say thank you. She leaned closer to me. There were so many questions and emotions swirling through me that my mind felt like it was going to burst. I almost flinched away from Grandma, but I stopped myself at the last minute. As her face came closer to mine, instinct kicked in. Thank you, Grandma, I mumbled, giving her a kiss on the cheek. You're welcome, Christopher, she whispered. Pancreatic cancer. That's what it's called. The thing that's slowly killing my wife. It doesn't sound so horrifying, does it? Pancreatic. It's the cancer part that's bad, obviously. It's the cancer part that's slowly eating away at my wife, my one true love, relentlessly devouring every part of her until there's just a withering, wheezing stranger left, her tormented gaze begging for it to be over, every fibre of her being aching for death. I tried everything up to that point, and I mean everything. You'd be amazed and appalled at the sheer quantity of BS snake oil miracle remedy stuff you'll find if you just go looking for them. All the healers, shamans, witch doctors, and loathsome charlatans preying on the weak and desperate. But conventional medicine had failed me, failed my wife, and I couldn't find it in me to give up, no matter how much she begged me to. At first glance, the nameless street seemed like just another hoax, a nonsensical ritual pasta designed to amass internet points. But the more I looked into it, the more I came to believe that there had to be some merits to it. Too many identical claims, too many similar experiences, too many vivid descriptions. Coming up empty on all other leads, I decided there'd be no harm in giving it a shot. The nameless street was as simple in its complexity as it was complex in its simplicity. At the end of an unnamed street, look for an abandoned house with a locked basement door. Find a way to get into the basement without breaking the lock. In the room beyond, you'll find 2 chairs facing each other. Make sure to lock the door again. Place 66 candles in a wide circle around the room. At the center, place 1/6 of a candle. When night is at its darkest, light all the candles. Sit down in the chair with the back turned to the door and count loudly to 66 1/6. If you get it all right, the devil himself will appear, granting you a single wish in exchange for your soul. Finding the nameless street wasn't easy, but at the same time, it wasn't that hard either. I just stumbled upon it, I guess. I went searching every evening after my visit at the hospital. That's the only thing that kept me going. Seeing her wasting away, another fragment of her dying every day. Body, mind, soul. Soon there'd be nothing left but memories. I paced the streets tirelessly for weeks, making sure to cover as much ground as I possibly could. Then, one night, it was just there. The doctors gave her a month, maybe less. We'd been together since high school. 10 years. Got married as soon as we legally could, sharing dreams of children, a house, a dog, a station wagon. A normal, boring, wonderful life. We were going to grow old together, die together, locked in an unbreakable embrace, exhaling our last breath at the exact same moment. But now she was leaving, fading, and I felt helpless and lost and alone. I needed this. I needed it to be real. It was just like I'd imagined it. A harrowing house at the end of the street, all the windows smashed in, front door missing, exterior greying and faded. A faint smell of urine lingered inside, and the walls were all covered in tasteless graffiti. I didn't care to inspect the house itself. I was there for one thing. I descended the ramshackle stairs leading down to a surprisingly sturdy-looking wooden door and gave the handle a try. Locked. This was the place. When I wasn't at the hospital, Stan was. I didn't even have to convince him. I just wanted someone to be there by her side at all times, and I think he understood that. My brother got along well with my wife, and it seemed like the right thing to do. When I arrived after work, Stan would be there, and we'd talk for a bit. It affected him too. Devoured him like it devoured me. He looked older than any younger brother should. I had to fix this, or we'd all just fade to nothingness. I returned the next evening with candles and tools. I had no idea how to pick a lock, but luckily some guy on YouTube did, and after about 30 minutes of finagling and cursing, I heard a soft click, followed by the door sliding open. The basement was just how I'd imagined it too, cramped and damp and dark. 2 chairs placed at the exact center of it. Once I made sure the door was locked, I started placing the candles in a wide circle, saving 1/6 of a candle for last. I sat down on the chair with the back turned to the door and waited. When the night is at its darkest, how can you tell? Isn't night just a lack of light? When the sun is down, isn't it just down? I felt stupid, ignorant, like I'd fooled myself into believing something that'd never work. How could it work? It was utterly ridiculous. But still, I couldn't give up now. I had to try. I owed my wife that much. I started lighting the candles. I figured it wouldn't get any darker, and couldn't very well spend all night in that creepy, abandoned hellhole. Better to just get it over with. It took a good 5 minutes to get all the candles in the circle lit, and I swallowed deeply before lighting the final one. It didn't feel any different, but I sat down regardless and started counting loudly to 66 1/6 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4. My voice rang hollow and insincere. I glanced around anxiously while counting, but save for the dancing shadows cast by the flickering candles, there was nothing. 33, 34, 34. Don't you find this hysterically ridiculous? A cheery voice queried from behind me. I suppose I wasn't really expecting anything to happen. Not really. Thus, the sudden realization that someone was there, behind me, caused me to tumble off the chair in shock, and I spent quite some time desperately struggling to get back up. I mean, you must have stopped at 66 1/6 and gone, wow, this is some next level absurd nonsense, right? He was not what I expected, at all. He was young, maybe in his mid-20s, long blonde hair, dressed in jeans and a white hoodie. He smiled widely, emerald eyes sparkling vividly as they scanned the room. All you had to do was ask. He mimicked, holding a phone up to his ear. No need for this unnecessary, elaborate. He paused, waggling his right index finger around theatrically. I want to say ritual? Who are you? I stammered incoherently. Such a useless question, he chuckled. Names have no meaning here. Are you? I staggered back to the wall. Are you the devil? Look, buddy, he grinned widely. It really isn't important. What is important, however, is what I can do for you. He wandered around the room nonchalantly, eyes darting back and forth between the flickering candles and me. He was tall and slim, yet unnaturally imposing, like he could squish me like a bug at any moment if he felt like it. I kept backing into the wall senselessly, like a frightened animal. Let's sit, shall we? He beckoned for me to join him as he sat down. We have much to discuss. Jesus Christ, I mumbled. Was this really happening? Nothing about it felt right. It felt unholy, blasphemous. My back scraped against the cold, protruding bricks of the wall, like the pain somehow ground me to reality. Jesus Christ, I added. Look, you can call me anything you'd like if it makes you feel better. His piercing eyes dug into mine. It really doesn't matter what fantasy you subscribe to. In the end, they're all nothing but lies. And just like names, they only hold meaning to owners and believers. And let's just say I'm neither. Now, please sit, James. You're making this whole satanic deal thingy very awkward for the both of us. How do you know my name? I mumbled, still subconsciously backing into the unmoving wall. He threw his head back and laughed heartily. So you came here to summon the literal devil, but you're surprised he somehow knows your name? James, you're really out of your depth here. You know that, right? He motioned towards the vacant chair. Sit, James, sit, and we'll discuss what I can do for Nora. The mention of her name brought me back from whatever delirious state I was in. I suppose I immediately stopped caring whether it was real or not. The end justifies the means. Isn't that what they say? Even if I was hallucinating, even if this was some insanely convoluted hoax, I had to give it a shot. I'd never forgive myself if I didn't at least try. I hesitantly stumbled to the chair and sat down facing the man. How do you know her name? I asked. How can you possibly know any of this? We've been through this, James. I know all I need to know, and that's just how it is. For instance, I know that Nora, sweet, sweet darling Nora, is slowly dying from cancer. I say slowly, but that's not really the case anymore, is it? I'd give her maybe a few days, a week at most. Better start making some arrangements. Choose a nice coffin, find a decent plot, organise the service. These things take time, you know. Wouldn't want to half-ass a funeral now, would you? I felt a sudden rush of anger. Anger and resentment and sadness and despair. I wanted nothing more than to punch his infuriatingly carefree face in, but something deep down inside me told me that would be a horrible idea. Instead, I just broke down crying. Heavy, convulsive sobs. There, James, my boy. It isn't over yet, he smiled. What if I told you I could take it all out of her? The cancer. Just reach into that frail, broken body and rummage around in there until it's all gone. Wouldn't that be something? I stared at him blankly, tears running down my face. Could you do that? I murmured. Could you really do that? I could. He leaned back, hands behind his head. But, you know, I just have to put it somewhere else. Natural order, balance and all that jazz. But I'll do you a solid, since I kinda like you, James. What do you mean? See, what I do with it, the cancer, is entirely up to me. I mean, I could just stuff it into you. And normally I would, you know. I'm a stickler for irony. You know how it goes. You can't live without the love of your life, so you make an unholy deal with some diabolical entity to save her, only to die days later. hilarious. But since you've grown on me like a tumour, I'll do you one better. What do you say we stick the big C into your worst enemy instead? My worst enemy? Did I even have enemies? I mean, I didn't really like my boss, and my neighbour was incredibly annoying. And truth be told, I could really do without the "you're not good enough for my daughter" attitude from my mother-in-law too. But an enemy? I suppose my co-worker, Eric, was the closest thing I had to an enemy. He was demeaning and malicious, always going out of his way to make me look bad. The more I thought about it, the more I realised just how much I hated him. "Yes," I said. "Do it. There's this guy, Eric, and my "Oh, I'm sorry," he interrupted. "I think you misunderstood me. I don't need to know who you think your worst enemy is. No, James, my guy, I know who your worst enemy is. I just need a yes and the old handshake to confirm our arrangement. That's all." "How do I know you can do it?" I suddenly felt a sobering doubt rising. This was all too good to be true. Too crazy to be real. How do I know I can trust you? "Ha, I'm glad you asked," he chuckled. "It's smart, you know, to question these things. Sure, I manifested in this locked basement out of thin air and know more about you and your wife than any random stranger possibly could. But I get it. You need proof." He stood up from the chair and leaned in close to me. I instinctively sank in my seat, desperately trying to avoid his piercing gaze. Now, I would love to say this wasn't going to hurt. His eyes gleamed eerily in the darkness. But I'd be lying, and the truth is everything, isn't it? That's why you're here, for the truth. You might not know it yet, granted, but you will. And who knows, you might even come to thank me one day. "What are you With inhuman speed, he struck both his hands into my chest. I know it's impossible. Of course I know it's impossible. But the pain was real, and the blood was too. Insufferable pain, like every nerve ending in my body was set on fire. Fountains of blood showered us both, and I felt the sudden presence of an impenetrable darkness. "Don't cross over just yet, Jamesy boy," he laughed. "We're only just getting started." I could feel him touching me from the inside. Fingers digging into tissue and muscles and organs. Every little prod bringing insurmountable waves of torment, somehow spreading to every pain receptor at once. I couldn't breathe, so I couldn't scream. But I imagine every synapse in my body lighting up simultaneously to form a hysterical howl. "Ah," he licked his lips. "There we go. Just the suckers we're looking for. They can be a handful, let me tell you, and all this blood makes it hard too, you know. Takes practice." With a forceful yank, he pulled his hands back, leaving behind a gaping hole in my chest. I should be dead, I thought, as I stared into the mangled depths of my own body. I was convulsing uncontrollably in spasming seizures, but I still managed to get a long, good look at what he was proudly holding in his blood-dripping hands. "Recognize them?" he laughed. "They're called lungs, primarily used for breathing, I've been told. Ugly suckers though, don't you think? Most of the stuff you find on the inside doesn't look as good on the outside. I guess there's some meaning to it, you know, aesthetics and such." He waved them around playfully, blood squirting everywhere. Every muscle in my body was spasming violently now, and I felt my mind starting to slip, overwhelmed by the unimaginable pain. I'm going to die, I thought. This is it. This is where they'll find me. But just as the alluring darkness was about to overcome me, I was brought back by his cheery voice. "So, does that do it?" he asked, his mouth now inches from my ear. "Are you convinced? Do we have an agreement?" I tried my best to nod, but I'm not sure you could easily discern the voluntary movement from the involuntary anymore. Blood was flowing in thick streams from the gaping wound in my chest, pouring into an impossibly deep pond on the cold concrete below. Suddenly, he grabbed my hand and shook it vigorously. "Good lad," he laughed heartily. "It's a deal then. I'll yank the nasty tumours from sweet darling Nora and pack your worst enemy full of the stuff. Really can't wait for this one, James. Sounds like an absolute riot." The darkness was closing in, and I felt some manner of peace as a thick blanket of heavy tiredness enveloped every part of my being. "I'll be on my merry way then," he said. "People to meet and eat. You know how it goes." I could hear him walking towards the door, heavy steps echoing through the room, too heavy for his lithe frame. Everything was turning black now, and I suppose I was mere seconds away from passing out and on when his voice brought me back once more. "Oh, right, I forgot," he chuckled. "You probably need these." Mind-numbing pain shot through my body as he pushed his hands into the wound again, brutally rummaging around in there for what felt like ages. Then, with a sudden yank, he was out again. "There you go," he said. "Good as new. Keep those suckers clean now, you hear? Stay away from cigarettes and huffing asbestos." He laughed. "Anyway, I'll be seeing you, James. I have a feeling we'll talk again real soon." And with that, he was gone. I was left slumped over my chair, wheezing and spasming for minutes before realizing I was completely fine. I refused to believe it at first. I examined my chest thoroughly, every inch of it, then turned my attention to the floor. Not a drop of blood. Not so much as a paper cut on my chest. It was like it had never happened. But it did, didn't it? The pain was so real, so horribly, gruesomely real. Minutes of excruciating torture that felt like years. And then, nothing? I didn't stick around to question what had happened. I got out of that basement in a panicky haze and never looked back. When I got home, I immediately collapsed on the couch, and I slept for 12 hours straight. I'm sure I would have slept longer, probably days, maybe a week, but I was ripped from my deep slumber by the sound of my phone. "Yeah?" I mumbled. "Who's this?" "James!" Stan yelled excitedly. "You're not going to believe this. It's a miracle." A miracle. Even the doctors agreed. There was just no medical explanation for Nora's sudden recovery. No rational way to describe how the cancer had just vanished. Poof. Not a trace left in her. A miracle, they all agreed. Deep down, I knew that wasn't the case, of course. It wasn't miraculous at all. In fact, it was probably the exact opposite. But I didn't care. I was just so happy she was still here, still alive, still breathing. I never cried like I cried that day. Tears of joy. Who knew such a thing could be real? Weeks went by, and that night in the basement slowly faded from memory. I guess I just went with it, pretended it was all some vivid hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and desperation and grief. And when Eric didn't get horribly sick and die, like I secretly hoped, I just let it all go. Life moved on. Except it didn't. It all stopped in that basement. Maybe not stopped, but perverted, grew out of control like cancerous cells. My wife sat down with me a month later. "We need to talk," she said. I could tell by the look on her face that it wasn't anything good. There were tears, lots of them, crocodile and otherwise, and a pained, guilt-ridden expression. She wanted a divorce, she told me. She'd been seeing another man for quite some time now, but because of the cancer and her imminent death, she didn't have it in her heart to tell me. But now that she was healthy and had her life back, she wanted to move on. Wanted to find happiness again. "Who?" I remember yelling. "Who is he?" It's Your brother, she sniffed pathetically. It's Stan. I suppose my life ended there. Betrayal comes in all shapes and sizes, but from my own brother, my own flesh and blood, it was too much to bear, and I guess I felt it already then. The hate, the seething anger and fury and resentment consuming every fragment of my existence from there on out. She moved out the same day, packed her stuff and went to live with my brother. I sat in the darkness of my trash living room for days, fueled and fed by nothing but bubbling detestation and loathing and hatred. I wanted to burn him alive, nail him to the wall, dig his eyes out with a rusty knife. He was already dead to me, but I wanted him dead to the world too. My worst enemy. And then, like clockwork, he got diagnosed with cancer. Pancreatic. Such a beautiful word. Rolls right off the tip of your tongue. Pancreatic. Instant and terminal. My brother died days after they first caught it. It spread faster than anything they'd ever seen, they told me. A reverse miracle of sorts. I cried no tears at the funeral. I don't think I'll ever cry again. Nora couldn't deal with his death. Her sudden recovery, followed by the hope of a new life with a new love, smothered instantly by cruel, hideous irony. She hung herself in Stan's garage a week later. I tried to cry at her funeral. I really did. But it was all empty. Hollow and void. A soulless husk. There was this moment, right after they lowered a coffin. A brief second of serene silence. No birds, no grieving masses, no wind. Just a perfect moment of tranquility. I could hear him clearly then, in the back of my mind. A cheery chuckle, a hearty laugh. I have a feeling we'll talk again real soon. Just like the uncontrollable growth of abnormal cells, the amassing sum of my sins spread to cover every aspect of my existence. There is no miracle, reverse or otherwise, waiting for me at the end of the line. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. There is no end to the tunnel. There is no end. As I stare into the fathomless depths of my empty void soul, I can only nod and agree. We'll talk again real soon. After making sure that the person who left it behind wasn't in the bathroom or popping out for a smoke, I picked it up. It was just laying there on the table in the middle of a bustling coffee shop. A fancy-looking camcorder, ripe for the taking. I wanted to make sure no one would steal it. The thing was brand new. Stickers advertising all sorts of HD capabilities and gigabyte storages were plastered on the front. The chrome on the body was spotless. The lenses crystal clear. The camera looked as if it was straight out of the box. The owner would definitely miss it. I couldn't go to the cops. I mean, I could, but I was too scared. How would the police react if someone like me walked in to hand in lost property? Sure, they would probably take it off me, congratulate me on becoming a good citizen and get the camera back to its owner. But there was a chance of them presuming that I stole it, had a change of heart and got scared of being caught. What would they do then? There was no way I was going back to prison. The cops were out of the question. Giving the camera to the coffee shop manager would have been stupid. Giving any lost property to any manager in this town is just generally not a good call. Back in the day, my pal Teddy used to do weekly rounds to the local businesses where he would pick up whatever was meant to end up in lost and found. The managers would get a kickback and all of the merchandise would disappear. Teddy would let me pick out what I wanted at a discount before he moved the stuff over to his contacts. The fat bugger sold me every nice coat I have ever owned. There was no way I was going to let the manager line his own pockets. Teddy was gone now, but I'm sure there was someone in his stead. In a town like this, there always was. The manager was an asshole anyway. When I came in for the interview, he kept on asking me about what I went in for, what prison was like, and all sorts of other questions that didn't relate to me being a potential janitor. In the end, he said he didn't think I was a good fit for the job. No way I was going to trust the guy who made me shell out bus fare just to get rejected. I would return it to my own. There had to be something in the camera that would help me identify the owner. I stashed the camera into my nice coat and rode the bus to my grandmother's. The idea of a finder's reward made the rejection from the job interview sting less. After I got out, I had nowhere to go. Whatever money I had made with Teddy was gone, and all of the ex-girlfriends were married. Didn't want anything to do with me or both. At the ripe age of 34, I moved back in with my grandma. She was pushing 100, but she still managed to have her mind completely intact. As long as I would shovel snow and be able to pick things up off the high shelves, I could stay with her. I promised her I would get out of her thinning hair soon enough, but she told me not to hurry. She enjoyed the company. The woman was an angel, but for a big chunk of my childhood, she spent time covering for the devil in me. I lived with her until I was able to pull enough scores to afford an apartment in the city. Whenever the police would show up at our door, searching for a 15-year-old me, she would distract them for just enough time for me to be able to sneak out of the window. If I carried her around with me everywhere, I'm pretty sure I would have been able to outrun the arrest warrant that landed me in prison. The day had been exhausting. I ran through half a dozen job interviews spread throughout the town, and none of them panned out. There was nothing more that I wanted to do than crash down in my child-sized bed and sleep off the stress of the day. Yet, there was still the matter of the camcorder to attend to. Figuring out which button turns the thing on and which plays videos took a while, but eventually, some combination of presses made the camera start up. I was hoping for a person listing off their name and address with a promise of a finder's fee, but instead, I got Karen. I don't know if her name was actually Karen, but there was something about her voice that just suggested it. It was the type of nasal tone that I would hear every time I was casing out suburbia for families that went out for vacation and had terrible alarm systems. Dozens of Karens yelling at the Joshuas and Stacys to come back inside and grab a jacket. Karen pointed a camera at a white sand beach resort. Waves caressed an empty coast, a glowing sunrise in the distance. The type of tranquil shots you would see on a Subway advertisement. "Wow," she said from behind the camera. "Isn't that sunset beautiful? Isn't that beach so gosh darn calming? What a vacation I'm having, huh? You could be here too. All you have to do is work your little butt off. Remember Rocky? He never gave up, and look where he is now. Work hard and you'll be able to afford the nicer things in life." The video cut out. I rolled my eyes and pressed something that looked like an arrow forward. A wedding reception. The bride and groom, straight out of a catalogue, danced their first dance in a loving embrace. Around them, a family on verge of tears, watching the lovely couple celebrate their eternal love. "Wow," Karen whispered. "See how happy they are? See how proud the family is? What a beautiful couple, aren't they? You could be just as adorable. All you need to do is be as honest as Washington was about the cherry tree and never let yourself give up. If you're a good, reliable man, you'll definitely..." The next video was a calm suburban street. It was night, but everyone seemed to still be awake. The light from their big glass windows revealed manicured lawns and the outlines of new cars. "Wow." I grit my teeth at the sound of her voice. "This is where I live, and oh boy is it cozy. Everyone says, 'How do you do, neighbour?' and we all talk together as a..." I closed the camera. Her voice was the auditory equivalent of a curb stomp. I put the camcorder on my spaceship-covered bedside table and tried to come up with a way to unload the merchandise. The hippos on my curtains reminded me of Teddy. If Teddy was still around, the camera would be easy to get rid of. The lazy bugger was just too out of shape to actually break into homes, but man could he get rid of stuff. Whatever I managed to grab from the houses, he would fence under a week. DVD players, TVs, jewellery, weird little statues of junk. The people that he knew had a use for everything. Too bad the people he knew lost the use for him. The one time I got to get out was for his funeral. Apparently, they found him all sorts of cut up in a ditch. The mob is a scary group of people to tick off. I got out of bed and went over to my grandma's computer. Surely there was a way to sell stolen stuff online without much of a hassle. Everything is online these days. I used the Google to look up the model of the camera, just so I would know what I was working with. I clicked around for a while. The number that I was getting seemed unreal. If I managed to sell it for even half of what it was worth, I could set myself up for at least a month, maybe 2. The number presented a problem too. If I was to get caught, this was definitely more than just petty theft. I wouldn't just be breaking parole. I would be getting another jail sentence. The coffee shop had cameras. The manager still had my information and would remember me. There were too many possible risks. I shut down the computer and went back to my room. For a couple of minutes, I tried to peel away the Pokemon stickers I stuck to my wardrobe, but the glue from the 90s held firm. I went back to the camcorder. I thought I could make out a street sign in the dark before. If I knew the neighbourhood she was filming in, I could bus over and ask around. Hopefully there would be a finder's fee. Maybe Karen would even give me a ride back home. When I turned the camcorder on, however, the tranquil suburban paradise was gone. Instead, there was a dusty basement. The camera shook for a bit, as if it was being attached to a tripod. When the image stabilized, a woman with the figure of someone who drives everywhere but still attends Zumba class appeared. She took a couple of steps in front of the camera and then edged over to the right to be in the center of the screen. The frame just barely covered her face. "Good," Karen whispered under her breath. She walked off screen. Somewhere behind the camera, a door opened. You could hear whimpers. I tried to focus in on what was being said, but all the pleas were drowned out by a thunderous metal scrape. The chair got pulled in front of the camera. Karen stood next to a naked, fat man with a shopping bag on his head. He was chained up on the chair. Sweat dripped down towards the indentations that the chains created on his body. The bag expanded and contracted as he struggled to breathe. Please let me go. I didn't do anything," he wheezed. She shushed him. Karen shifted the chair around to make sure both her and the man were in the frame. She cleared her throat, paused for a moment, and then started raving. "Wow," she screamed in outrage. "You think it's okay to steal? You think it's okay to take something away from me? Do you comprehend how hard I work to be able to afford the nice things I have? Well, I tell you what, Buster, it's not. If you do the crime, you deserve the punishment." "I didn't steal anything. Please, just let me go. This is all a misunderstanding." She faced the man for a bit, as if considering his plea, but then she tutted. Karen made her way back behind the camera and started fishing around in unseen drawers. "If you were just honest, this would all go by in a jiffy. But you lie, so it won't. If everyone was just honest, we'd all be better off. See, if everyone is honest, works hard and does their best, then we have a happy little community. But there's always bad apples, aren't there?" Karen walked back to the man. Before he could answer her little monologue, she stabbed him. "Ah, damn it!" I recognized the voice, nearly dropping the camera. "You stabbed me! Okay, I stole your camera. I'm sorry. Look, I'm really sorry. I won't do it again. I promise. I swear on my daughter's life. I won't steal anymore. Damn it, I'm sorry." She held the knife inside him, sending a trail of blood down the chains that wrapped around Teddy's body. It looked as if she was considering his plea. "You don't have a daughter," she finally said. "What? I do have a daughter. She's 7 years old. Her name is..." She sliced the knife back, making Teddy scream until his voice gave out. I wanted to turn off the video, but I couldn't. Everything in my body wanted to smash the camera to pieces. There was a burning desire in me to destroy any evidence of such brutality even being possible. But I just kept on watching. Teddy screamed. They were mostly desperate howls of pain, but words made their way in when Karen had to catch her breath. He pleaded for her to stop. He confessed to not having a daughter, to stealing her stuff, to fencing stolen goods, to every sin that he could possibly think of. Yet she just kept on tutting and cutting. There was no forgiveness. Any notion of goodness, of justice, of peace, none of these things could coexist in a world where one human being could cause to another the pain that Karen was dragging out into the world. As she hacked on, Teddy's screams lost in volume. He started to drift off. When he was lucid, his rambling confessions would be replaced with something much simpler, a plea for death. The floor was covered in blood and flesh. The remnants of what used to be a friend of mine sat in the chair. Karen took a step backwards to admire her work. The chain nestled in his bloody lap like a jagged blanket. She walked back to the camera. "Wow," she whispered as she unscrewed the camcorder from the tripod. "Who knew that a life of crime would get you this kind of punishment?" She picked up the camera and moved it towards the body. Her voice gained back its pep. "Well, you did, silly. You know stealing is wrong. Can't do the time, don't do the crime, right?" Her voice went cold. "Right." The shopping bag rustled with a strained breath. The video cut out. I started to feel faint. I had to lie down on the floor so that I could fully spread out my body. The hippopotamus curtains were right above me, trying to remind me that there is a corner of the universe where cartoonists put together cute comic hippos. But my mind kept on being dragged to the butcher. For minutes I just lay there, imagining myself in Teddy's place, feeling my own fragility. The lay down didn't make me calmer, but it did help me regain some strength. I got up for a glass of water. My grandma was already asleep. I poured myself a glass from the tap and tried to figure out what to do. At this point, the cops were the obvious answer. There was evidence of a murder on the camera. I would come clean about picking up the camera from the coffee shop. It was, after all, with best intentions. The murder would outweigh any possibility of me being seen as a thief. I picked up the landline, getting ready to call the police. But a glint of doubt kicked in the back of my head. What if it wasn't Teddy? What if I had simply stumbled upon some strange amateur film shoot? The thought of the video not being real was a balm for my soul. As soon as the idea entered my mind, I calmed down. I put down the phone and went to check the video again. I shouldn't have. I went back to my room, sat down on my bed, and popped the camera open again, hoping to scroll back through the video. Instead, I stumbled upon something else. At first, the viewfinder was too dark to make anything out, but as the camera moved around, I could see the outlines of a street. All the houses were dark, except for one. The camera started moving towards it. A passing bus illuminated the area for a split second. A turned-over lawn chair nestled on an unkempt lawn filled the frame. The camera was plunged back into darkness. It stopped and focused on one lit-up window. Karen started to zoom in. "Wow," she whispered. "There he is." She zoomed in on a window with hippopotamus curtains. A grown man sat in a child's bed, staring in horror at a camcorder. I looked up in the darkness past my window. All I could see was my own terrified reflection. I leapt to my curtains and shut them. I smashed the light switch. The night still lay in silence for a minute. Then came the knocks. 3 sharp, equally spaced knocks. I paced around the room, trying to figure out what to do. 3 sharp, equally spaced knocks. In a panic, I grabbed my chair and propped it up against my door. 3 sharp, equally spaced knocks. I took the chair away. I thought I could run out into the kitchen and call the police. This is what the police were for. But I didn't have a chance. A pair of shuffling footsteps went through the hallway. My grandma opened the door. Faint talking could be heard, and then my grandma yelled for me. Someone was at the door, asking to see me. I stood, frozen in my room. The faint talking continued. After a couple of moments, my name was yelled again. The front door closed. 2 sets of footsteps entered and moved towards the kitchen. I could hear my grandma chatting away. Her voice was calm and collected, as it always was when she was stalling for me. She started to pour a kettle of tea. I crawled out of the window and ran. The Good Snooze Motel was my go-to bedroom if I had any company back in high school. For $20, they would give you a room for the night, and for an extra $5, no questions would be asked. The place hadn't changed much over the years. It was still a hole in the wall where no one would find you. I only had $7 on me, but they begrudgingly took my grandma's credit card as collateral. Room C3, 3rd floor, TV and phone included. I grabbed my keys and raced upstairs. The sun was starting to peek through the fog outside. The plan was to call my grandmother, make sure she's okay, wait an hour until my parole officer would be available, and then call her directly about the camera. I was meant to check in anyway. It would be better to talk to someone that knew me. The plan was simple. If I just stayed calm, everything would work out. Except for one hitch. The phone in my room was disconnected. This wasn't entirely uncommon. The snooze was infamous for stuff breaking down. I got ready to go ask for another room when I heard it. 3 sharp, equally spaced knocks. I froze, praying that it was my mind playing tricks on me. 3 sharp, equally spaced knocks. It wasn't. I made my way to the peephole of the room and was greeted with complete darkness. There was something on the other side blocking the hole. I paced the room back and forth, all while listening to the knocks. They grew sharper with every strike. With dread, I checked the camera. The battered door of room C3. Occasionally, a terrified-looking eye would stare out, directly into the lens. I tried yelling for help out of the window, but the passing cars paid no attention to me. No one responds when I bang on the walls or stomp on the floor. The people who come here are used to a ruckus. I've turned on the television to drown her out and caught a glimpse of a report about a horrifying home invasion in my neighbourhood. I'm a snivelling mess, hating myself for the moment when I laid hands on that camera. I don't know what to do. I just want to be somewhere where I feel safe, where I won't have to think about Teddy or Karen. The pounding reached the point where it seemed like the door was going to give in. But then it ended. Instead, out of the hallway, I heard a single word. Wow. "10 a.m. I went into the kitchen, made myself a bowl of cereal and carried it into the dining room to eat. If I had my way, I would have taken it back to my room, but my mother would have had a fit if she caught me doing that. Last time I tried, she disconnected my Xbox from the router for an entire weekend. When I entered my room, my little sister, Constance, was already at the table playing with her crayons while she ate her toast. I pulled out my chair and started to sit down. I should have known something was up when Constance stopped what she was doing and started watching me with a sly smile on her face. "What the hell, Constance?" I yelled after I sat on a doll, sending one of its hard plastic limbs into the crack of my ass with enough force to bruise my tailbone. Both Constance and the doll started laughing. I hated that doll. It was hideous and had one of the most annoying voices. If you squeezed different parts of its body, it would say different things. The laugh was generated by squeezing its stomach. I stood up and grabbed the doll off the seat by its legs. "Give it back!" Constance ran over and tried to snatch the doll out of my hand, but I held it over her head, just out of arm's reach. "You want it?" I said, holding the doll out like a football. "Go get it!" I drop-kicked it into the living room. As the doll flew over the sofa, it giggled and said, "Uh-oh, better get a diaper." "Mom, Adam kicked Sally." Say It Sally was the name of a doll. "Mom, Mom, Mom," I mocked her. "What have I told you about taking a doll away?" Our mother stormed into the dining room. "I didn't take it," I said. "She left it in my chair, so I moved it." "Don't push me, Adam. Go and get a doll." She pointed towards the living room. "But..." "Do it," she said, turning and walking back to the kitchen. That was how she let you know the conversation was over. She would just walk away. Constance stuck her tongue out as I walked by on my way to the living room. I pretended to pick my nose, then reached out to wipe my finger on her tongue. She screamed and ran into the kitchen. "Stupid doll," I said, reaching down to pick it up. But before I did, it said the strangest thing. "No more days will follow for you. There's no tomorrow." It came out of Say It Sally's mouth like a poem, but the words seemed like they were cobbled together from different phrases the doll typically says. I grabbed the doll by its hair and carried it into the kitchen, where I dropped it off on the floor in front of Constance, who was telling Mother that I tried to make her eat a booger. "Keep your creepy doll away from me," I said, leaving the room to go eat my cereal. 12 p.m. "I need you to keep an eye on Constance while I run to the store," my mother called out as she walked down the hall. I was sitting at my desk playing on my laptop. "Did you hear me?" She stopped in my doorway. "I heard you," I snapped back. She glared at me for a moment, then stormed into my room and pulled something out from underneath my bed. "I thought I told you to leave a doll alone," she said, holding up Say It Sally for me to see. "I didn't put it there," I protested. "Constance probably put it there to get me in trouble." "I don't have time for this," she said, walking out of the room with the doll. "Just leave it alone." 1 p.m. "Mommy said you have to play with me while she's gone." Constance walked into my room, hugging her ugly doll. "No, she didn't. Now get out." I pointed towards the door. "If you don't play with me, I'll tell Mommy about the nudie magazines under your bed." "What?" I said, momentarily confused by how she knew about the magazines. A friend of mine stole them from his older brother and gave them to me. I kept them with my comic books in a box under my bed. "Have you been going through my things?" I stood up and approached her. "No," she said, holding a doll out towards me. "Sally told me." I grabbed Constance by the shoulders, turned her around, and marched her out of my room. "She also said to tell you a poem, but I can't remember it. I do remember that it ended with, 'There's no tomorrow.'" I slammed the door in her face and locked it. "What does that mean?" Constance's muffled voice came through the door. "She's never said a poem before." I ignored her and got down on my hands and knees to look under my bed. As I tried to locate my box of comics, the one with the magazines in it, something else caught my eye among the clutter. It was a small piece of silvery plastic, about 3 inches long. I didn't recognize it at first, so I reached under the bed and pulled it out. "What the hell?" I said, holding up the little plastic knife that had been sharpened to a point. I recognized it as one of the toy utensils that came with my sister's play kitchen. I walked back over to the door, unlocked it and swung it open. I was going to confront my sister and ask her where the little knife had come from. But I changed my mind when I saw Say It Sally sitting on the floor across the hall from my room. "I will feel no sorrow for you. There's no tomorrow," Sally said. I kicked the doll down the hall and into the living room. I wasn't afraid of it. It was just a toy. If it wanted to keep threatening me, I was going to respond in kind. "Have you seen Sally?" Constance asked, peeking her head out of her room. "Nope," I replied. "If she knows what's good for her, she probably left," I added, returning to my room and shutting my door. 2 p.m. I found this under my bed. I held the toy knife in the palm of my hand so my mother could see it. "So," she said, "I remember you doing something similar with one of your plastic army knives when you were younger. I only did that because you wouldn't let Dad buy me a real one." Maybe she was just trying to make it more functional. You know how much she loves having tea parties and cutting up donuts like they're real cakes. I'm sure it's nothing. "Nothing," I scoffed. "This thing's razor sharp." I held it up like I would a real knife. "And why was it under my bed?" "I'll talk to her," my mother said, pulling the knife out of my hand and setting it on the counter. "Whatever." I threw my hands up and turned to leave. I knew Constance wouldn't get in trouble. As I tried to walk out of the kitchen, something caught on my foot and almost sent me tumbling face first into the counter of the granite countertop. If I hadn't flung my arms out before me and caught myself, I would have been killed. "Are you going to talk to her about that too?" I said, kicking said Sally across the floor. That stupid doll is what I had tripped over. "Every time I turn around, that stupid doll is in my way," I complained. "I'll talk to her," my mother said, walking over to retrieve Sally. "But if you kick or throw this doll one more time..." She pointed Sally at me as she gave a warning and didn't have to finish what she was thinking. I knew what her favourite punishments were. 2:30 p.m. "I'm sorry," Constance huffed from the doorway to my room. "No, you're not." It was obvious from her tone that she was only apologising because my mother made her. "You're right, I'm not, because I didn't do it." "You didn't do what?" I wanted to find out what my mother had told her. She had a history of going easy on Constance. "I didn't make that knife, and I didn't leave Sally on the floor. I shouldn't have to apologise." "Let me guess, Sally did it all by herself, right?" "She did," Constance yelled. "She was only trying to help." "Whatever." I got up and crossed the room to shut the door. "Apology not accepted. And for the last time, keep your doll away from me or else." "Or else what?" "Or else I'm going to pull off her arms and legs and feed them to the neighbour's dog. Now move so I can close the door." "I'm telling Mom." "Go ahead," I said, shutting the door in her face. I could hear her repeated cries of "Mom" as she ran down the hall to tattle on me. I didn't care. 4 p.m. The sound of a piece of paper being slid under the bedroom door caught my attention. I got up from my desk and went over to pick it up. There was a handwritten note in red crayon that said, "No days will follow for you. There's no tomorrow." I recognised my sister's handwriting. I reached out and grabbed the handle to the door, intending to show my mother the note, but stopped myself. Knowing her, she would just dismiss it and tell me to grow up and stop acting like a toddler. It wasn't worth the hassle. I crumpled the note up in my hand and tossed it into the wastebasket that was sitting next to the desk. I had something else in mind to get even with my sister and Sally. 4:15 p.m. When I saw Constance pass by my room on her way down the hall, I got up to see where she was going. I had opened my door so I could keep tabs on her while I was waiting for the perfect time to enact my plan. It's now or never. I crept down the hall and into Constance's room after I saw her step into the bathroom and close the door. While I was in her room, I grabbed the Sally doll from where it was sitting at the tea party table and the jump rope which was tied around a bedpost. Then I got to work. When I was finished, another idea occurred to me, so I ran down the hall to my room. Once I grabbed what I needed, I returned to Constance's room and added it as a final touch. Perfect. I admired my handiwork for a moment before leaving. I finished just in time too. Constance walked out of the bathroom right as I walked back into my room. I knew I was going to get into trouble for what I had done, but it was worth it. 4:25 p.m. Mom! I couldn't help but smile when I heard Constance yell, but my joy was short-lived. When her screams became sobs, I suddenly felt like the biggest jerk in the world. I was okay with making her mad, not with making her cry. From the way she was wailing, you'd think I really killed a doll. What the hell is wrong with you? My mother came into my room, holding the Said Sally doll up by the jump rope noose I had strung her up with. Still taped to her dress was the altered note that now said, "No days will follow for me, there's no tomorrow." I couldn't look her in the eyes. Answer me, why did you do something like this? She raised the fist that was clutching the rope, making Sally sway. It was a joke, I replied, looking at the posters on my wall. This was not a joke. She removed the noose and note before tossing Sally onto my bed. Go in there and apologise to her. She pointed towards Constance's room. I stood up and snatched the doll off my bed, which triggered her giggle. You'll be lucky if I don't tell your father about this when he gets back. My mother's voice carried down the hall as I knocked on my sister's door. She was watching me from the doorway. Go away, Constance yelled. I hate you. I turned and looked at my mother while gesturing at the door. How did she expect me to apologise to Constance if she was going to overreact like that? She just folded her arms over her chest and cocked her head to the side, letting me know I wasn't getting out of it. If you don't open the door, Sally's going to be lonely out here all by herself. She didn't answer, but I could hear her get off the bed and walk across the room. When she opened the door, I held Sally out to her and apologised. I still hate you. Constance snatched the doll out of my hand and slammed the door in my face. Was that good enough? I asked my mother as I returned to my room. Almost, she said, walking over to my desk and unplugging my laptop. What are you doing? I complained. I apologised like you told me to. That wasn't your punishment. This is. She walked out of the room carrying my laptop. When do I get it back? Whenever I decide to give it back, she called out from the hallway. 6 p.m. What's for dinner? I called out from the couch. I heard my mum in the kitchen and assumed she was getting ready to make us something to eat. Since she took my laptop away, I had spent the past hour watching television and was starting to get hungry. You're going to have to fend for yourself, she replied, leaning out of the kitchen. I'm taking Constance to the movies. What? I picked up the remote and paused the show I was watching. Why does she get to go to the movies? That doesn't seem fair. It doesn't matter what you think. After the stunt you pulled, you're lucky I'm letting you watch TV. Can I at least have my laptop back before you leave? I stood up and started to walk towards her as she turned around and went back into the kitchen. I made it a few steps before I tripped over something. I was walking too fast to stop myself from falling, but I did manage to catch myself before planting my face into the carpet. When I looked back to see what I had tripped over, I wasn't surprised to see Constance Said Sally doll sticking out from beneath the couch. What was that? The sudden clatter of me bumping into the end table as I fell brought my mother back into the room. Are you okay? She asked when she saw me getting him off the floor. No, I'm not okay. I reached down and snatched Sally out from underneath the couch. I'm tired of seeing this damn doll every time I turn around. I swear it's trying to kill me. Adam, language, my mom yelled at me. If you don't want me to talk like that, then keep this damn thing away from me. I threw the doll at her feet and stormed off to my room, slamming the door to make my point. 7 p.m. We're leaving now, my mother said, knocking on the bedroom door to get my attention. I didn't answer. I left you some money on the counter if you want to order pizza. We should be home sometime after 9. There was a brief pause before she spoke again. Did you hear me, Adam? I heard you, I replied, not bothering to put down the comic I was reading. I waited until I heard the front door close before I got up and went into the kitchen to see how much money my mother had left me. I was surprised when I saw the $20 bill held in place by the cookie jar on the counter. It wasn't like her to leave me money when she went out. She must have decided to take pity on me after I tripped and almost killed myself in the living room. I pulled the bill free and stuffed it into my pocket. I hadn't decided if I was hungry enough for a pizza or if I wanted to save the money for something else. My computer was the thing I wanted most of all at that moment, so I went searching for it. It wasn't anywhere in the kitchen. I didn't think it would be, but since I was already in the room, I figured I'd search it first. After that, I looked in the living room and the laundry room. I even checked the bathroom. When I didn't find it in my parents' bedroom, I started to think my mum might have taken the computer with her, but that wouldn't be like her. I'm sure it was somewhere in the house. I just needed to figure out where. 7:30 p.m. I returned to my room when I couldn't find my computer. As I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, I tried to think like my mother. Where would I hide it if I were her? I already checked all of the obvious places. When she took it, she was mad at me because of what I did to Constance Say It Sally doll. She wouldn't. I sat up as the perfect hiding place came to mind. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I left my room and walked down the hall to Constance's room. "Very funny, Mom," I said, swinging the door open to find my laptop on Constance's bed with Say It Sally sitting on top of it. Before I could walk across the room and grab the computer, the phone in the kitchen started ringing. The laptop wasn't going anywhere, so I went and answered the phone. "Hello?" I said. "Hey Adam, it's Mom. Can you do me a favour and see if Constance left a doll at the house? I could have sworn she brought it with her, but it's not in the car." "Yeah, it's here," I answered snidely. "Right where you left it, sitting on top of my laptop where you hid it in Constance's room." "What are you talking about? I didn't hide your laptop in Constance's room. I put it under the sink in the kitchen. I would never hide anything of yours in her room." "Well, that's not where I found it." "I don't know what you're playing at, Adam, but I don't have time for this. The movie is about to start," she said to me. She must have covered the phone, because when she spoke again, her voice sounded muffled and far away. But I could still understand what she was saying to Constance. "Adam said you left Sally in your room." "I didn't leave her in my room. I brought her with us. I remember sitting on the seat next to me and putting on a seatbelt." Constance's voice was much louder than my mother's. "Well, that's where she is," she said to Constance. I could hear her remove her hand from the phone before she spoke again. In the background, Constance was yelling, trying to get her mother to believe that the doll was in the car. "I have to go," she said to me, "and stay out of Constance's room." She didn't give me any time to reply before she hung up. I would gladly stay out of my sister's room, right after I got my laptop back. The doll and the computer were still on the bed when I walked back into Constance's room. Part of me expected them both to be gone after the day I've been having. "I will feel no sorrow for you. There's no tomorrow," Sally said as I leaned down and slid the computer out from underneath her. "Screw you," I replied, knocking the doll onto the floor with the back of my hand. When Sally landed on the floor, something fell out of her dress. I leaned across the bed to get a better look at the object she had dropped. It was the little plastic knife that had been sharpened. I stared at the toy knife, thinking that my little sister was a psycho for sharpening it and placing it in Sally's dress. Why does she need a knife? I seriously considered picking it up and shoving it through the forehead of that ugly little doll, but I knew that would make me look even crazier than Constance, plus I'd get in way more trouble. I decided to leave the doll and the knife where they fell and let my mother deal with it. I was about to grab my computer and leave, but a sudden noise stopped me. It sounded like someone had dropped a glass in the kitchen, but no one else was in the house with me. I walked over to the doorway and leaned my head out enough to peek down the hall. When I saw a hand reaching through the broken pane of glass of the back door to unlock it, I knew I was in serious trouble. Someone was breaking in. I quickly retreated into the safety of the room as I began to panic. I was alone in the house and the only phone was in the kitchen. There was no way I could make it there and back without being seen. I need to hide. Constance's room wasn't very big, so there weren't many options. If the huge iron frame of a bed wasn't blocking the window, I would have escaped that way, but there was no way to get to it without making a bunch of noise. I was running out of time, and I didn't know what else to do, so I crawled under the bed, pushing stuffed animals out of my way. I positioned myself so I could look out into the hallway from under the bed. I wanted to be able to track the intruder's movement as much as possible. If an opportunity to get out of the house arose, I wanted to be ready to take it, assuming I could overcome my fear and anxiety. When I heard footsteps out in the hall, I turned my head towards a closet, wondering if it would have been a better option to hide there. But my view was blocked by the Say It Sally doll, her stupid plastic grin mocking the predicament I was in. "I will feel no sorrow for you. There's no tomorrow." Sally's voice was deafening in the quiet confines of my hiding place. No, no, no. I prayed the person walking down the hall hadn't heard the doll, but I wasn't that lucky. When I turned and looked back towards the doorway, I saw a pair of scuffed up work boots pointing in my direction. "Jackpot," the man said, taking a step into the room. I didn't know what he was talking about, until I remembered I had left my laptop sitting on Constance's bed like an idiot. "Aren't you a creepy little bugger?" the intruder said, nudging Sally with the tip of his boot, causing her to roll over and face the ceiling. "Was that you who was talking?" He lifted his foot and placed the sole of his boot on the doll's head. "I will feel no sorrow for you. There's no tomorrow," Sally said, but then she started laughing. Every time she said that phrase to me, she didn't say or do anything else. The laugh was something new, and there was nothing funny about it. Hearing it gave me goosebumps. "Screw you," he said, stepping on Sally's soft plastic head, deforming it. But that didn't stop her from laughing. The sound must have bothered him as much as it bothered me, because he pulled his leg back and kicked her under the bed and right into my face. I couldn't stop myself from grunting when the hard plastic of Sally's arm connected with my cheek. I froze, hoping the sound wasn't loud enough to be heard. "Looks like I found me a stowaway." The man's face came to view as he peered under the bed. He smiled, flashing his yellow teeth at me. "Get out here." His smile disappeared as quickly as it came. Every instinct told me to run, so that's what I did. I grabbed Sally and slammed her into the man's face with as much force as I could muster. There was a loud popping sound as the doll connected with his nose. The stranger moved away, covering his nose with his hands. I used that opportunity to slide out from underneath the bed, hoping to make it to the door before he recovered. I didn't get very far. "You shouldn't have done that." The warning was followed by the familiar sound of a gun being cocked. "Stand up," he commanded. I did as I was told, turning to face him while holding my hands up. I must have hit him extremely hard because he was pinching his nose closed with one hand, trying to keep any more blood from leaking out. With his other hand, he pointed a small silver revolver at me. "Get over here," he motioned at me with the gun. I walked over and stood in front of him, trying to avoid eye contact with him. "Turn around and get on your knees." He's going to shoot me. My brief life flashed before my eyes. I thought of all the things I wouldn't get to do, all the people I'd never get to see again. I didn't want to die. Not like this. I'm sorry," I stammered. "Take anything you want. Please don't shoot me." Tears streamed down my face as I turned around and started to get down on my knees. "Does the little baby need his dolly?" he mocked me in a childlike voice. I looked down at Sally, laying on her back where she had fallen after I'd used her to smack the man in the face. It would figure that the last thing I would see before I died would be hers. She was the reason this happened. I wouldn't have been home alone if the doll hadn't been messing with me all day. She must have somehow known this was going to happen and set it all up. Did she just wink at me? The tears in my eyes must have been playing tricks on me. Sally has never winked before. I wiped the back of my hand across my eyes, then looked back down at the doll. She winked again. There was no denying it the second time. As I stared at her, my face a mask of confusion, her head rolled to the side. What the hell was going on? What was she trying to tell me? That's when I saw the little plastic knife clutched in her outstretched hand, the one that had been sharpened. That was when her plan became clear to me. Sally wasn't trying to get me killed, at least not directly. Everything she had done was part of a carefully calculated plan to get my mother and sister out of the house. That was why she kept antagonizing me. She wanted to escalate things between Constance and me, knowing that my mom would take her out of the house and they'd be safe. I don't know how or why, but Sally knew someone was going to break into the house. She must have also known that I'd be the one to confront him. Looking at Sally, her head pointed towards her outstretched arm, made me realize the knife was intended for me. Hurry up! The intruder pushed the barrel of the gun against the back of my head. Once I was on my knees, I leaned forward, shielding Sally from the intruder's view as I retrieved the knife from her hand. When I leaned back, I picked her up and cradled her in my arms. I hope this works, I whispered into her hair. See you tomorrow, she replied. I hope that's not your doll, the intruder said. So what if it's mine? I tightened my grip on the toy knife, praying it was sharp enough. You're right, it doesn't matter. I could feel the tension in the air as he ready to pull the trigger. I'm sorry, I said. You should be. I wasn't talking to you. I was talking to the doll. I whirled around, standing over the process. I swung Sally out before me, using her body to knock the gun away as I lashed out with a toy knife. The muzzle of the gun flashed at the same moment Sally collided with the intruder's hand. I felt the bullet burrow its way into my shoulder as it knocked me backwards, but all of that happened after my knife nicked the soft flesh of the man's throat. I didn't feel any pain until I hit the floor. It felt like someone had jammed a hot ice pack through my shoulder. The intensity of the pain was making it hard to breathe. I could feel my vision dim as I tried to calm myself down enough to leave the room. It wasn't until I was able to get myself into a crawling position that I saw the intruder lying on the floor, gasping for air as he bled out from the hole I had made in his neck. When he saw me looking at him, he reached out his hand to me. The sight of all that blood made me feel lightheaded, or maybe it was all of the blood I had already lost. When I tried to stand, I couldn't keep my legs under me. I was able to take 2 steps towards the hall before I collapsed and let oblivion claim me. The next day. When I opened my eyes, the bright and blurry surroundings were unfamiliar. I tried to sit up, but someone stopped me. Try to lie still, the nurse said, her features slowly coming into focus. Where am I? You're in the hospital, she replied. I was about to ask her what happened, but then the events of the previous night flooded my mind. The machine next to me started beeping faster, picking up my elevated heart rate. I was shot, I said to her. Yes, you were, but you're okay now, the nurse said, placing her hand gently on my arm. I'm going to get the doctor. In the meantime, there's someone here to see you. The nurse walked over to the door, opened it, and then waved someone over. I wasn't surprised when Constance walked in, carrying her Say It Sally doll, followed by my mother. I'm sorry, Constance said, hugging Sally. For what? I'm sorry you got hurt. I could see tears forming in her eyes. It's not your fault, I said. Actually, if it wasn't for your doll, I might have gotten hurt a lot worse. Sally saved me. Sally saved you? She did. And she saved you and Mom. I looked up at the brick facade of the building. On the face of it hung a white painted plywood sign. The paint peeled at the corners, obviously old. On it was a single word, written in faded black ink. Spa. The building appeared to be old, probably built sometime around the 1920s. It was a bit of a landmark for the town, settled right in the heart of the historic district. I looked down at the small, rectangular piece of paper in my hand. There was an animated picture of a woman, like one of those 1950s style cartoons. She had a towel wrapped around the top of her head, a green face mask and cucumbers over her eyes. The message was written in the same font as the worn sign. Exchange this coupon for one free service of your choice. This offer does not expire. I turned my gaze back toward the aluminium frame glass door and entered. Small bells chimed as they crashed against the door. The smell of lemongrass and eucalyptus welcomed me as the door swung shut. There was a frail, old lady sitting behind the counter. She held a magazine closely in front of her face, reading it intently. I stood there for a moment, expecting her to look up and greet me. When she never did, I let out a quiet ahem. She looked up from her magazine, appearing to be slightly startled. Her thick rimmed glasses magnified her eyes underneath, large and cartoonish. She slowly rose from her seat and approached the counter. "Sorry about that," she said in a shaky voice. "Sometimes I get so intrigued by my stories that I don't hear those bells. Seems like I don't hear much these days." She giggled. "What can I do for you, sweetheart?" I looked down at the small paper flyer in my hand. It was wrinkled and worn, but the message clearly said it didn't expire. "Yeah," I started, extending my hand out towards her. "I found this coupon and I'm wondering if I could still use it." She looked at me over her glasses, which were perched on the tip of a wrinkled nose, stretched her arm out and took the paper in a loose grasp. After examining it for a moment, she looked back up. That warm smile still sat on her face. "Why, yes, honey, sure you can. What services were you looking for today?" I looked behind her, consulting a small board tacked on the wall. It was plain white with black sticker letters. I noticed a few different options. A massage 60 minutes, full body massage, a facial, a mani-pedi, and one that appeared to be worn away. "I'm sorry, what's the last one?" I asked, pointing up to the board. She turned and examined it for a moment, then quickly whipped back around before excitedly telling me, "Oh, that's the float tank. It's a sensory deprivation chamber. You get a 60-minute session with this coupon." "What exactly is a sensory deprivation chamber?" I asked with genuine intrigue. She bent over and reached into a cabinet just below the board, removing a small plastic case of some sort. "Honey, I think it's something you're going to fall in love with." She smiled that same warm smile she'd shown before. "It's a tank that we filled with about 8 inches of water, heated to your body temperature and mixed with an inordinate amount of Epsom salt. It really soothes the skin. The tank is soundproof and completely dark, so your mind can relax in ways you've never experienced before as well." She looked me up and down for a moment before continuing. "If you'd like to use it, you'll need these earplugs." She slid the small plastic case across the counter. "You don't want to get that water in your ears." "Is it safe?" I asked, curiosity building inside me. "Oh yes," she assured me. "It's very safe. The only trouble some people have is that they claim to have vivid visual or auditory hallucinations." She smirked for a moment. "Sometimes both. But you seem like a strong enough young man. You look like you've got a good head on your shoulders. I don't think you'll have any troubles once you're inside." I thought about it for a moment. I did have a fairly good grip on reality, in my opinion. My stomach did flips inside me as excitement, coupled with the slightest bit of fear, surged through my veins. "Okay," I said after a few moments. "I'll do it." She continued grinning as she made her way around the counter to a door on the left side of the room. "Come with me," she called, pulling the door open and stepping through. I followed with anxious steps as she led me down a dimly lit hall. Room after room of massage chairs, manicure booths, and pedicure seats passed before we finally reached our destination. She opened the door, stepping into the small area. It was an empty room, save for a large, tan-coloured metal tank in the middle with a couple wooden steps in front of it, a small cabinet on the left, and a glass-enclosed shower in the corner. The old lady struggled for a moment as she yanked the heavy tank door of the tank open. It was a small opening, and the door was made of thick metal with a large, shiny chrome handle. The tank itself looked like it could stand up against anything. I peered my head in. The inside of the tank appeared to be painted black. Aside from the small amount of light that came in through the now open door, it was pure darkness. The light shined through about 8 inches of hazy, salted water sitting undisturbed on the bottom. It had a scent like the ocean, and the air inside was dense and humid. "So," I started, pulling my head from the tank. "What do I do?" "Well," she reached down into the small cabinet next to the tank, removing a white towel. "You're going to need a shower first. Get any oils, dirt and sweat off your skin. This will help the salt do its magic. Then you just get into your birthday suit and slide into the tank. I'll come back in an hour to let you know when your time is up." She handed me the towel. "Oh, and don't worry, I won't peep on you." She laughed as she exited the room, closing the door behind her. Okay, I thought. Easy enough. I did as she said, stripping down and giving my body a quick rinse. Once I was done, I stood outside the chamber for a moment, staring in nervous hesitation. The fear of the unknown began to take hold. What would it be like? Will the pure darkness and lack of any sound drive me to insanity? I wallowed in dread for a moment, anxiously pacing back and forth in front of the large metal box. A strong sense of foreboding took hold. Fighting my nerves, I told myself to get it together. I convinced myself it wouldn't be that bad. I told myself to quit wasting time and just get in the thing. So, I did. I walked up the small, wooden stairs and up to the tiny square hole. It was barely big enough for me to fit through, but I knew I would. Another fear took hold as I stepped inside, standing in the hatchway for a moment. What if I was claustrophobic and didn't know it? I'd never been in a confined space for any extended period of time before, so how could I know? I swallowed the thought, pushing it deep down in my stomach, and continued into the chamber. The water inside was warm, the perfect temperature. The air was warm as well, and rich with moisture. I sat down, noticing that, aside from physically being able to see it, I couldn't quite tell where the water stopped and my body began. I reached up and pulled the hatch above me closed and was plunged into pure, horrifying darkness. It was unsettling, being in such an absence of light. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. That, coupled with the absence of all sound, was pure terror. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my heart thumping away my chest. The drone in my ears from the blood moving through my veins became deafening. That's when I realized I'd been holding my breath. As I sharply inhaled, the sound hummed inside my head. The sound of air whooshing in and out of my lungs blared with each hurried gasp. Just concentrate on your breathing, I told myself. In through the nose, out through the mouth. I repeated the mantra in my head a few times before I finally felt my nerves beginning to calm. I noticed the tension in my arms and legs. Had I been straining them since I started having this mini panic attack? I released the tension and a deep-seated feeling of relaxation overtook me. The darkness wasn't so bad. The sound of my breathing humming in my ears rhythmically was actually starting to seem relaxing. In the void of light, I noticed something beginning to emerge. A phyllotaxis pattern of sorts. It began with a single triangular shape, turning clockwise as it morphed into 2, then spiraling out into 3, 4, 5, 10, until the pattern was infinite. A perfect, organic spiral continuing before my very eyes. Oh my god, I thought in amazement. Something began to happen to the pattern. Something was disrupting it. A deep blooming caused it to fizzle out and dissipate back into the void. Were these the auditory hallucinations the old lady had warned me about? The blooming continued to thunder in my ears, overpowering the sounds of my breathing, sending me back into panic mode. I felt my breath become harsh and laboured once again. An uneasy tightness gripped my chest, and I reached out, grasping for the walls. The sounds of screams came next. Pained, horrified screams. Things you can only imagine, but never thought you would hear. The sounds of women and children panicking and shrieking for dear God or whoever. It sounded as if they were in danger. A war zone of some sort, being slaughtered. Just calm down, I thought to myself once again. This time much more sternly. Focus on your breathing. I took a sharp inhale into my nose, holding it for a few seconds, and back out my mouth. The rumbling booms continued, overlapped by the terrified shouting. Another deep breath, holding it in and exhaling through my mouth. The sounds began to die down, but still resounded. A final deep breath. Finally, things were quiet. I released my grip from the slimy walls surrounding me, and after a few moments of trying to clear my mind, I fell back into deep relaxation. The swirling spiral pattern began to emerge from the darkness once again, tricking my eyes into thinking I was seeing something that wasn't there. They continued to morph, revolving before me in a hypnotic turn. I felt my eyes begin to get heavy, but never felt myself fall asleep. I must have though, because I was awoken abruptly. Someone pounding on the hatch door. I jerked myself upright, trying to hear what they shouted, but I couldn't make it out. There was silence, and I removed my earplugs. "Hello?" I said. The echo reverberated through the chamber. The sudden loud sound sent my ears into a frenzy, overwhelming my senses. The lid of the door swung open, shining bright orange light into the chamber. My eyes sealed shut, fighting to maintain the deprivation of senses they had grown accustomed to. "We got one over here," the gruff voice of a man shouted behind him. I slowly opened my eyes to see a large figure of a man with wrinkled features. Not wrinkled from age, but stress. He had a thick, grey moustache and large 80s-style glasses. He reached a gloved hand in, extending it out in a grasp. "Take my hand, kid," he said, shaking it in front of me, as if he were trying to coax me to do something I didn't want to do. I took his hand in my grip, allowing him to help me to my feet and out of the tank. My hands were stiff and my grip weak. My legs wobbled under my body as I struggled to step out of the tank. "Easy there, kid," the man, who was now made out to be a firefighter, said to me. He grabbed me under the elbow and helped me step out of the chamber. Another fireman ran up, handing a towel over to cover my exposed body. I looked around in shock. It was a scene more fit for a post-apocalyptic movie than my daily life. The sky was darkened. Had it become night? How long was I in there? Smoke painted shadows across the navy blue horizon. Bricks and rubble laid scattered all around me. The shower, or what once had been the small enclosure, was now nothing but a metal pipe that continuously sprayed water in all directions. Small plumes of smoke emerged from beneath the piles of rock and shattered glass. "What?" I started to say, but halted. I couldn't find the words. Confusion overtook my senses, and I felt consciousness beginning to fade. My legs gave way, and I fell to my knees. The rubble stamped into my skin, sending a jolt of pain up my legs. "Hey kid," he said in a rush. "Don't pass out on me." He gripped my arm tighter and pulled me back up to my shaky feet. "I need you to stay awake for a little while longer. Just a little bit longer." His demands began to turn into more of a plea. I fought to stay awake, ultimately succeeding despite my eyes continuing to get heavier and heavier. My stomach churned and nausea settled. The heat was overwhelming, but I didn't know why. It was dark. It should have been cold. And where was the light coming from? My eyes shot open when I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, coming from a pipe that ran into the ground, was a large plume of bright orange fire. A group of men brandishing hoses fought it, attempting to kill the flame before it spread any further. What happened? I asked, wide-eyed and full of terror. Gas main blew, took the whole building down. You're lucky you were in there, the firefighter said, motioning his head back to where the tank sat. It remained unfazed by the destruction. You didn't hear anything? He asked as he led me to a nearby ambulance. The EMTs stood outside of the truck, awaiting my arrival. They had a stretcher at the ready. You couldn't hear the explosions? The screams? His voice quavered a bit, as if it was on the verge of tears. You're the only one who made it. What's happening in the world right now reminds me of the first time I was in a quarantine. I used to work for an international aid organisation. My team specialised in supporting areas affected by severe infectious outbreaks. My first assignment was in the winter of 1994, when we were sent to a secluded town in eastern Russia with a population of roughly 2,000 people. For confidentiality reasons, I won't disclose my organisation's name or this town where this incident occurred. The community was suffering from an outbreak being referred to as blazin, bubble sickness. Its name derived from the pink and dark grey blister-like lesions that closely resembled bubbles in shape, which broke out across the victim's skin. The sickness also had your classic flu-like symptoms: high fever, cough, body aches, and, in severe cases, delirium. We arrived in town 10 days after the first case was reported. Since then, 57 people contracted the illness, out of which 14 had perished. Our primary responsibilities were to distribute supplies, set up a temporary infirmary, morgue, and implement quarantine protocols. We weren't worried about the illness spreading beyond the town, given how secluded it was, and knew the Russian government would keep the situation quiet. 5 days after my team arrived, the number of cases and fatalities respectively rose to 98 and 29. The town took a more aggressive approach and put a mandatory quarantine in place, prohibiting residents from leaving their homes under any circumstances. Only soldiers, the town's small police force, and my team were permitted outside for door-to-door supply deliveries, working at the morgue and infirmary, along with testing townspeople to monitor the fever's spread. I became particularly friendly with one woman named Leah, whose home was on my delivery route. She lived on a small farm in the outskirts of town and had an infant son named Alexei. Her husband was working an oil field in Siberia at the time and wouldn't return until the spring. Although her home was out of the way, I always made it a priority to get her anything she and her baby needed, both of whom eluded the sickness. I even gave her a portable radio to contact me directly in case of an emergency. Leah, who spoke English, was endlessly thankful for my help and started giving me little gifts like trinkets and knickknacks she made herself as a token of gratitude. 1 month after we arrived, the sickness only worsened. The number of cases rose to 300, out of which 74 died. My team felt their control of the situation slipping when some of our fellow colleagues became sick, with one dying just a few days after first showing symptoms. The Russian government took matters in their own hands by instating some bold measures. Everybody was to remain in place for 28 days. Anyone caught roaming the streets would be arrested or shot. My team was allowed to continue our routine duties, but were prohibited from venturing outside of the perimeter set up around the town. I was very concerned for Leah, whose house was located just outside the perimeter. The lockdown was instated right before I was supposed to drop off Leah's next round of supplies. Although I pleaded to make one last drop-off, government officials making the calls didn't budge. Each supply delivery gave a household about 2 weeks worth of food, water, medicine, and other materials. I feared whatever Leah and her son had left would only last them a few days. Although I was powerless to physically get her any additional supplies, I vowed to maintain radio contact with Leah and kept a log of our conversations. Since it was a portable radio and Leah was low on batteries, we only spoke a few minutes each day. She had to keep the radio off when she wasn't using it to conserve power. Below is my log detailing some of our interactions over this 28-day period. Day 4. Leah thinks she has roughly 5 to 7 days of supplies left for her and Alexei. If she rations everything properly, Leah believes she could last up to 10 to 12 days. "I'm concerned about my baby," she said, the fear very apparent in her voice as it crackled through the radio. "There has to be something you can do for my baby boy." Despite her looming shortage of necessities, Leah said she nor Alexei were exhibiting any symptoms. She was keeping herself busy by crafting more trinkets and knickknacks. Day 9. Leah thinks she underestimated how much food she had left for Alexei. She's down to 2 jars of baby food, 1 packet of formula, and had run out of clean diapers. She cried to me for the first time today. The fear and uncertainty in her voice was so disconcerting and surreal. It prompted me to take action. I quickly forged a plan to get Leah and her son the supplies they sorely needed. Before I was set to embark, however, a vicious blizzard rolled in that blanketed the region with over 3 feet of snow. The quarantine prevented any roads from being cleared, making Leah's home physically inaccessible. I still get haunted by the sounds of her hopeless weeping when I told her the news. There was one particular remark she said that sticks with me to this day. "Perhaps my son and I weren't meant to overcome this dark time. If the sickness does not kill us, we may be condemned to a death of much greater suffering." Day 11. Another 2 feet of snow fell last night. The town is practically buried. I don't even think people can get out of their homes if they tried. The snow has made our job a lot more difficult since the roads aren't being shoveled. To me, the snow personifies my mounting dismay and despair of helping Leah and her baby. The feeling of powerlessness is absolutely smothering. I broke down when I last spoke to Leah. She's so scared. Although she understands why I cannot reach her, part of me can't help but blame myself for her current predicament. Day 14. Leah has run out of supplies for herself. The fact she was able to make what little she had last this long was remarkable, and certainly a testament to her perseverance. She said Alexei only has a few spoonfuls left of baby food. She has no formula, no diapers. The baby was constantly crying when I spoke to Leah. Every sob and whimper sent sharp chills down my spine and formed knots in my stomach. I'm unsure how effective this quarantine is, since the number of cases has risen to 900, nearly half the town. Fatalities are at 350. This disease spares no one, but I'm at least thankful it hasn't reached Leah and Alexei. Perhaps living among the outskirts of town was a blessing for them in that regard. But like Leah said, it could be a precursor to a more agonizing demise. Day 15. Leah fed Alexei the last of his food. They're now both completely out of supplies. She spent our conversation weeping and blaming herself for putting her son through this, and kept asking why she wasn't more prepared. I tried comforting her, but Leah was inconsolable. I haven't slept the last 2 nights. I can't get Leah and a baby boy off my mind. The trepidation, guilt and sorrow has weighed heavily on me, especially since our radio interactions don't feel nearly as reassuring. I haven't eaten much lately. It doesn't feel right knowing people like Leah and a baby don't have access to the same means. Part of me hopes I do contract Pazir Palazan, so I don't have to listen to their suffering. Day 18. Leah said it's been 5 days since she's had anything to eat. 3 days for the baby. All I want is to end my baby's suffering, Leah sobbed to me when we spoke that day. I don't care if I make it out of this alive. I just want Alexis' suffering to stop. Why must someone so new on this earth have to be dealt life's most unforgiving hand? All I can do is tell Leah to take things one day at a time and assure her everything will be fine. I know Leah can sense the false hope in my voice. The baby's cries sound like hollers of sheer agony that grow worse every day, like the poor child is being physically tortured. A little piece of me dies every time after Leah and I speak. Part of me wonders if this subjugation to Leah and a baby's continual suffering is punishment for some misdeed I've previously committed. I don't know what I could have said or done to deserve such a demoralizing penance. Day 19. I think Leah is taking a turn for the worse. She aimlessly babbled about how hungry she was, or making new trinkets and knickknacks, and anticipating the return of her husband from Siberia. All he does is cry, Leah said when I asked about the baby. I left him in his crib upstairs so I can have some solace from his infernal shrieks and cries. I can't do anything to ease my child's pain. I have accepted that reality. Although he grows weaker by the day, but his cries are becoming more piercing and unbearable. I'm just so hungry too. So hungry. Leah's voice was very hoarse and weak. She claims they aren't sick, but would welcome the illness at this point, which she described as liberating. There are now over 1,000 cases. Hundreds have died, including members of my team. The infirmary and morgue are both at capacity. Any new cases have been ordered to self-quarantine in their homes. Bodies are starting to pile in the snow next to the morgue. How I haven't caught this illness is either a miracle or catalyst prolonging my torment. Day 24. I haven't heard from Leah in days. Today, she finally responded. Alexei is dead. My baby boy is gone. That was all she said. Day 26. I managed to get in touch with Leah, but she was completely despondent. She just sobbed and rambled incoherently, constantly shifting between English and Russian. From what I could make out, Leah kept lamenting about a baby dying and proclaiming herself a failure as a mother and wife. Earlier in this quarantine, I would have been beyond distraught over what Leah's lost, but felt completely numb, almost emotionless when we spoke. All I did was give Leah the same empty assurance that everything will be fine in a flat, robotic voice. I reminded her the quarantine was ending in 2 days, after which I would immediately come to her house with supplies. She didn't seem to care or listen, probably because she knew I didn't even believe my own words. The illness didn't have to infect everyone to inflict pain. What I experienced here will plague my memories for years. Although I'm surviving, I've been long dead on the inside. It's amazing Leah has managed to go this long without food. I sincerely hope she doesn't succumb to the heaviness of losing a child and give up, especially with 2 more days left. She has to remain strong to keep a child's memory alive. Day 28. The quarantine has finally been lifted, but it's still going to take some time before I can reach Leah's farm. The number of new cases is slowing, but the death toll has exceeded 700. More than 75% of the town fell ill. It's hard to say if the quarantine truly worked, but we're confident the town will eventually recover. We worked frantically to dig out the town streets and start getting supplies to households. I tried radioing Leah, letting her know the quarantine is over and I would be at her house as soon as possible. She never responded. It took another 2 days before I finally got to Leah's farm. I and 2 of my colleagues rushed over to her house with a full replenishment of supplies. The front door was unlocked, and when we first stepped inside, we were hit with a wall of putrid stink containing the distinct odours of feces and decay. Bundles of used diapers, rags and clothes were piled in a few room corners. Some sections of walls were covered in deep scratch marks, holes, along with smears of what appeared to be blood. The house was in varying degrees of disarray, looking like Leah threw a massive tantrum and destroyed parts of her home in the process. We found Leah curled up in the corner of a living room. She was mired in filth, looking like she hadn't bathed or slept in days. She surprisingly wasn't as frail as I anticipated from malnourishment, but was completely checked out mentally. Leah seemed to recognize me and signaled she wanted to give me something she was tightly clenching. When I extended my hand, she dropped a small white trinket in the shape of an A that was about the size of a quarter. "I made them to keep my son's memory alive," Leah said weakly, who was in a deep trance when she spoke to me. "Promise me you'll keep it and always have a piece of my baby boy that stays with you." The A was intricately carved and felt smooth to the touch. I was actually impressed by its flawless shape of white, which almost made it look professionally done. It looked to have been carved out of marble or ivory. The hardest part came next when I asked Leah where her baby's body was located. She started fiercely sobbing and trembling before shakily pointing towards the kitchen. A knot formed in my stomach when I started easing toward that part of the house while my colleagues tended to Leah. Amidst the nauseating stenches filling the house, I quickly distinguished the aroma of rot and decay that was exclusively associated with death. The kitchen was as bad as the rest of the house, with empty cans, broken dishes, glasses, along with soiled clothes and other unidentifiable stains and smudges strewn across the floor, table and counter. Burying my nose in a cloth to withstand the stomach-churning smell, I walked up to the table, where a half-dozen other A's lay clustered next to some rags, tools, and other small stack of white porcelain shards that I presumed Leah used to craft the trinkets. A sharp, sinking feeling befell me when I noticed a dish at the head of the table that was covered with blackish red smears. The utensils were also covered with the same substance that I willfully remained ignorant in identifying. I noticed a cluster of flies congregated over the sink. I shuddered upon seeing what was inside. 4 limbs, no less than 5 or 6 inches, that were completely stripped of their flesh, except for the tiny hands and feet at the end of each limb, which are unmistakably an infant's. "Please no," I murmured while fighting the urge to vomit and acknowledging my worst suspicions were confirmed. I violently turned away from the sink, starting to keel over slightly in anticipation of vomit, and it was then my eyes were drawn toward the oven, where another cluster of flies were buzzing around, and the stench of death was strongest. My limbs trembling, I slowly stood upright and crept toward the oven. Although I refrained from inhaling, I still felt the warm, grimy wall of decaying odor rush out as I opened the oven, inside of which lay Alexis' head and limbless torso. The body was burnt to a crisp and was the same red color as the smears on the dinner plate. While initially feeling sorrow and remorse, those sentiments were replaced with repulsion and sheer terror when I noticed the chunks of flesh had been removed from the body with surgical precision, and parts of the baby's featureless torso were stripped to bare bones. This appalling sight, one I can still clearly visualize after all these years, made me face the morbid truth I desperately tried denying. but explained why Leah managed to survive this long without food. She ate her baby. My breathing was reduced to short, gasp-like breaths as a wave of panic swept over me, during which I swiftly turned away from the sanguinary sight and looked back at the table, where I noticed another unsettling detail before storming out of the house. A closer look at the small stack of porcelain shards that Leah used to shape her trinkets affirmed there was something else. Pieces of skull, ribs and spines. I retrieved the A-shaped trinket Leah gave me, staring at it in sheer horror and disgust before chucking it across the kitchen. The trinkets were composed of bone. She was using her dead infant child's bones to craft these ornaments. Leah's words, "You'll always have a piece of my baby boy that stays with you," and what she literally meant rang through my head as I bolted outside and retched profusely. I refused to re-enter the house and never saw Leah again after that fateful day. I don't know what became of her, but heard whispers she descended to a point of uncontrollable insanity and was placed in an institution. I refused to ponder whether Leah waited until her baby died or if she put him out of his misery. In the end, 1,600 people fell ill to Bezir Belazan. The final death toll was 808. I don't remember how much longer I spent in that town, but was eternally grateful when we finally left. Although I've been told there was nothing I could have done to save Leah and her son, I still suffer from insurmountable guilt and am ruthlessly haunted by these memories. Things may be bleak now, but I can assure that very few, if any at all, have endured the experiences I've faced during my first quarantine, and hope none of you ever do. I am one of the biggest streamers on Twitch. I play games spanning all genres, and my streams consistently get over 20,000 viewers. I love what I do. It has taken me many years to get to where I am today, and not a day goes by that I wish I was doing something else. That is, until the horrifying events of last Friday happened, which have shaken me to my very core and left me wondering if I'll ever stream again. The stream started normally. I powered on my facecam, loaded up my Twitch interface, and then went live. My viewer count immediately jumped to 2,500, and within a few minutes was at 10,000. Although this has been the norm for at least 2 years, watching that viewer count rise so quickly still makes my heart race inside my chest. It makes me remember all of the streams that I did back in the day, when 5 viewers meant that my stream was popping off, and receiving even a tiny donation sent my head spinning through the clouds. I greeted my chat and then made a big announcement. For today's stream, I was not only going to play the games of their choice, but I was going to play them with randomly chosen subscribers. I wanted to do something special for my 6th anniversary stream, and the positive response was immediate. The chat board started filling up so quickly with comments and emotes that they flew across my computer monitor faster than the eye could register. The event began successfully. I played a few matches of Overwatch with a guy who happened to be around my age, and who was hilarious, and then Dead by Daylight with a girl who had just finished high school. My stream quickly rose to 50,000 viewers, and might have even reached 100,000 had things not turned out the way they did. As it stands, the stream took a frightening turn while I was playing with a third subscriber of the day, a 7-year-old named Tanner. "Hello D," he said after joining my Discord server, opting to call me by my nickname instead of my streamer name. "Hey buddy," I said. I could immediately tell by the sound of Tanner's voice that he wasn't any older than 10. For this reason, my initial thought was to discreetly find a way to dump him and then pick a different subscriber to play with. It's not that I have anything against kids, I just felt uncomfortable streaming with someone so young. I didn't want to do or say something that might upset them, and I also wasn't sure how my chat was going to respond. I have a zero tolerance policy for bullying or negativity during my streams, and the last thing I wanted to do was exploit this kid for my own personal gain. When I turned my head to read the chat room though, the comments were nothing but positive. "He sounds so cute. Come on D, play with him. I wonder what game he's going to choose." These comments and several dozen similar ones flooded my monitor within seconds of Tanner's voice ringing in my headset. So I knew that I had to play with him. If I backed out, then there would be an uproar. I wished now that I had listened to my gut feeling and dumped him rather than put myself and my chat through what happened later. Looking back though, joining my Discord server might have been the best thing that Tanner could have done that evening, for it increases chances of making it through the night. "Welcome to the stream," I continued. "Do you know what game you want to play?" "Minecraft." He gave the answer that everybody in chat had predicted, which sent them spiraling into awws and silly emotes. There was an innocence to Tanner's voice that made me like him immediately. I could tell he was the quintessential kid, fun-loving, excitable, and quick to laugh. "Minecraft it is then," I said. "Let's boot her up." "Okay." We were silent as we launched the game. I knew that as a professional I should be making small talk with him, but I just wasn't sure how to go about bantering with such a little kid. I don't have any younger siblings or cousins, and my wife and I haven't reached the point where we've decided to have kids of our own yet. Luckily, Tanner solved this problem for me. "Should we play in my world or yours?" he said. "Let's play in yours. I think everybody would love to see what you've built." "Alright." He sent me an invite. I accepted it, and then spawned into his world. "Come find me so I can give you a tour of my—" His voice was interrupted by the sound of shattering glass, which boomed through his headset so loudly I had to lower my volume. Based on the explosiveness of the sound, I figured that its source was close to his computer. "Is everything alright?" I said. "Something just broke in my living room," he said. "Let me check." I heard the muffled sound of him taking off his headset, and then heard him quickly pick it back up and place it on his head less than a minute later. "D," he continued, voice a frightened whisper. "There's a strange man in my house, and he just went into my parents' room." The stress in Tanner's voice convinced me that he wasn't lying. I could practically hear the tears forming in the back of his eyes and would have tried to comfort him if the phrases "strange man" and "parents' room" weren't ringing inside my head so loudly they were threatening to block out all reason. I felt like somebody had laced a Dr. Pepper bottle resting beside my mousepad with acid. I was experiencing a bad trip, and this stream gone wrong was my own personal hell. It was the realization that I was still maneuvering my character in Minecraft that finally snapped me back to reality. Here, a child was in the middle of experiencing a life-threatening event live on my stream, and there I was mining a tree for its logs with my bare fists as Subwoofer Lullaby pulsed gently through my headset. The shame I felt at my selfishness and for ever caring so much about view counts and the fickle comments of my chat still lines my throat to this day. I closed down Minecraft, yanked my hand away from the mouse, and then placed my focus solely on the microphone and the sound of Tanner's voice. Everything else that I normally cared about while streaming, I buried under my desire to help this innocent kid who probably fell asleep every night watching my YouTube videos on his iPad. Doing my part to save his life was all that mattered. "Tanner," I said, "you need to call the police immediately. Are you by a phone?" Luckily, my voice came out steady. I was afraid that it would come out shaky given the adrenaline pumping through my body like a drug. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see the comments on my chat room whizzing across my monitor like a broken slot machine. I did my best to ignore them. "My phone is in the living room," he said, voice just above a whisper. I could tell that he was only moments away from crying. "Don't worry, buddy. I'll call the police for you. Is there any place that you can hide? Where inside the house are you? Are you in your room?" "Yeah, I'm in my room." His tears had started falling full force, making his voice sound nasally. The distant scream of a woman erupted in my headset. The scream sounded painful and guttural, as if whoever was making it had their vocal cords torn out one thread at a time. For one of the only times that night, the chat became completely still. "You need to hide now, Tanner. Is your headset wireless?" "Yes, sir." "Good. Take it with you and crawl under your bed." For the next few moments, all I could hear was sniffles and the rustling sound of Tanner sliding under his bed. "I'm here." "Are you safe?" "Yeah." "Okay, good. Stay put. I'm going to call the police, but first I need you to tell me where you live." Luckily, he knew his exact address, and I wrote it down using the pencil and paper I always keep in front of my monitor as soon as the words left his mouth. "Good job, buddy. You're doing great. Hang on for a second while I call the police, alright? Don't take your headset off." "Don't leave me alone, Dee." His voice was laced with so much feeling as he said this that for a moment I felt tempted to ignore the police and stay right there in the Discord server with him. This feeling quickly passed though, as another scream, this time from a male, exploded through my headset and sent the hairs on the back of my arm shooting into the air. "I'm not going anywhere, I promise. This will just take a moment. Stay where you are." I quickly looked up the number for the police station in his city, which was in another state, so I couldn't just call 911 on my computer, and then pulled out my phone and gave them a call. "Police department, please state your emergency," said a woman's voice in my ear. I told her the situation in as few words as possible. She paused for a moment before speaking, presumably looking at whatever resources were in front of her. "Our closest officer is 30 minutes away," she finally said. "He will be there as quickly as he can." 30 minutes? It was then that I realized how truly secluded Tanner's house was from the rest of the city. From my initial scan of Google Maps, I typed in his address on a fresh tab while I explained the situation to the dispatcher. I could see how rural his neighborhood was. I doubted that it had a local Walmart, much less a regular police presence. The closest house was probably 10 acres away, and the next one, miles. "Yes," said the dispatcher. "You heard me correctly. Is Tanner still on the line? Chat with you?" A rare slip-up, and understandable given the unlikelihood of the situation. I had heard of other streamers getting swatted before, but this made even that dangerous prank look like child's play in comparison. "Yes, he is." "Good. Is he safe?" "He should be. I told him to stay under his bed. Tell him that the police officer is on his way and that he needs to stay hidden until he arrives." I put my headset back on and relayed Tanner her message. He responded with a tear-clogged, "Okay," and then I lifted my phone back to my ear. I told him, "Thank you. From here on out, I want you to stay in the chat with him. Put me on speakerphone so that I can hear what you're saying, and so that I can advise you should any new developments occur." The moment the words speakerphone left her mouth, I cursed myself in my mind. Why hadn't I thought of that? Here I was, surrounded by thousands of dollars worth of gaming equipment, and I was too stupid to think of utilizing a technology that even my 80-year-old grandfather could use. I hit the speaker button, placed the phone in front of my keyboard, and then nuzzled my headset back over my ears. The sound of Tanner's shallow breathing greeted my flesh. He sounded like a small and wounded animal, caught in the middle of a railroad track as a freight train came hurtling towards its head. "Hang tight, buddy. A police officer is coming as quickly as he can. You're doing great." "Thank you, Dee. I always knew that we would be friends." Before I could respond to such a touching remark, a scream so guttural ripped through the headset that I nearly reared back in my chair. "Are you okay?" I said, trying to keep my stomach acid from rising into my chest. "They're in the living room now," he said, voice almost a sob. "I think he's killing them." Several more screams burst through the chat. "He's killing them!" "Keep your voice down, Tanner, or he'll hear you." My command was greeted by whispered sobs. I imagined Tanner's voice shrieking in my ears as he met the same fate as his parents, and sped along the officer's patrol car in my mind. Another volley of screams berated my headset, flooding my ears with a twisted crescendo of guttural yells. These screams seemed to go on for an eternity. And then, my headset went silent. Several agonizing minutes later, the dispatcher's voice sounded through the phone on my desk, telling me that the officer had just arrived in front of the house. This news came much earlier than the initial estimate of 30 minutes and filled my body with joy. "Keep hiding, Tanner," I said. "That officer I told you about just pulled into your driveway. He's here to help you." "Okay, D." A few moments later, the sound of gunshots burst through the headset, followed by another round of screams. Terror gripped my lungs at the sound. Coming in guns blazing like that, I'm sure hadn't been the officer's plan. Something must have happened. My guess was that he had been ambushed, and I desperately hoped that he had been the one to come out on top. "What are you hearing now, Tanner?" I said. He was silent for a few moments, and then said something so horrifying that it has haunted me to this day, and will continue to do so until I am old and grey. "The man just said, 'Dumb F-word cops. The heads don't come off like they used to.'" I slumped back in my chair, blood draining from my face like water down a drain. I'm sure if I would have looked up at my monitor, I would have saw a ghost staring back at me. My already sky-high stress levels went plummeting into the atmosphere, and I couldn't tell up from down. Their heads don't come off like they used to. Dumb F-word cops. The sound of Tanner's hoarse and innocent voice projecting the words of such a sadistic man will echo for an eternity in the darkest chambers of my mind. So horrified was I by the thought of what happened to that poor police officer, tears nearly filled my eyes. Now wasn't the time to let my emotions get the better of me though. Given that there weren't any other cops in the immediate area, I knew that I was the best positioned person to help Tanner escape the situation alive, and, as much as it frightened me to think about, in one piece. "Just sit tight, Tanner," I said, voice almost as hoarse as his. "I'm going to find a way to get you out of this. I promise." "I trust you," said Tanner. He had stopped crying long ago. I could tell that he had fallen into survival mode, and I respected him all the more for it. Although he wasn't my kid, and I had known him for such a brief time, my newfound responsibility towards him made me feel as if he had been born into my arms. "Hang on for just 1 second. I need to talk to the woman on the phone again, okay?" "Okay." I took my headset off and leaned in closer to my phone. "Are you still there?" "I am. The officer you sent is dead." "Are you sure? How do you know?" "Tanner heard him get beheaded." I knew of no other way to say it. He can hear the man who killed him talking to himself about it in the living room. Jesus Christ. Hearing this brief comment from the dispatcher filled me with almost as much dread as the thought of hearing Tanner's last breath billowing through my headset. For it was the moment that I realized just how much of a dangerous turn the situation had taken. If a professional police dispatcher who dealt with emergencies daily was shocked enough to make such an out-of-character comment, then something truly extraordinary was taking place. "I have a SWAT team on the way, but it would take them at least 35 minutes to get there. And this time, when I say 35 minutes, I mean it. We were lucky that Officer Brunswick was able to arrive at the scene so quickly. The SWAT team is travelling from town, which is a lot slower going. I pictured Officer Brunswick's body laying in the middle of Tanner's living room, bloody and headless, and thought that he was anything but lucky. What do we do then? He doesn't have much time. You need to tell Tanner to flee the house the moment he has the chance. His house is in a densely wooded area. He can take refuge in the trees until the SWAT team arrives. Ask him if he has any windows in his room. Okay, good idea. I grabbed my headset from its place on my desk and threw it back over my ears. You still with me, Tanner? Yes, sir. The way he sometimes called me sir was so endearing that it only made me like him and fear for him even more. You need to run out of your house the moment you get the chance and hide in the woods until more policemen get there. I know it's scary, but you have to trust me. Are there any windows in your room? No. Tanner's answer made me place my head in my hands. What kind of room didn't have any windows? I don't understand. You said that you're in your room, right? Yes, but my room is in the basement. Of course it was. At this point, I couldn't see any variations of this situation that ended with Tanner leaving the house alive. He might as well have been stranded on the moon for all of the good anybody could do for him down there. The thought that he might get pulled out from under his bed at any moment, screaming bloody murder before the sadist slashed him to pieces, burned my every breath. Before I had a chance to consult with the dispatcher about this new development, Tanner's whispering voice once again greeted my ears. He's looking for me, Dee. I can hear him walking around upstairs. He keeps saying that he's going to find and kill whoever is hiding from him. My heart just about leapt through my chest. Once I took a breath and thought about it though, it made sense that the intruder now knew that there was somebody else inside the house. For why else would a police officer arrive at the scene, gun drawn, unless somebody had reported him? Everything is going to be fine. Just stay where you are. More help is on the way. You don't understand. He's coming down the hall towards the basement. I can hear his footsteps getting closer. Tanner's voice started speeding up. I have to do something, Dee. I can't stay under my bed. He will find me too easily. I heard the sound of thumping footsteps approaching through my headset. Oh my god, he's at the top of the stairs. I heard the rustling sound of clothes sliding across carpet. Tanner! I shrieked. Tanner! The cacophony of a body tumbling to the ground raised my eardrums. I heard the sound of a knife splitting flesh, and then a scream so guttural it made all of the previous screams I had heard that night seem like laughter. I nearly passed out in my chair. I felt like my heart was being torn from my sternum. Had I really heard what I just thought I'd heard? Had Tanner, that innocent little boy who just wanted to play Minecraft with his favourite streamer, really just been massacred in his own bedroom? I couldn't stomach the thought. This couldn't be happening. The universe wouldn't be so cruel as to rob this innocent child of his beautiful life. Just as I had given up hope that I would ever hear Tanner's voice again, his voice rang out, loud and clear through my headset. I got him, Dee, he said. I tripped him as he came down the stairs and then murked him with his own knife, just like you would have done. I looked over at my monitor, and through the thousands of Pepe hands and poggers I could see whirling across the chat at a nauseating pace, my eyes locked onto one word, which stood out among all the emotes like a signpost glowing through the windows of a speeding car. Justice. As proud as I am of Tanner for taking the situation into his own hands and ending the life of that miserable wretch, I am having difficulties finding myself again after such a traumatic experience. The memories of that stream haunt me daily and plague my sleep with brutal nightmares. It's not the sadist that haunts me, although I think about him a lot too, but the prying, invisible, 50,000 pairs of eyes that were watching the event unfold in real time through my stream. They had loved every minute of it. It was the best stream they had ever seen, and probably ever would. It was this thought that caused me to have a realization. They would watch the same thing again if they were ever given the chance. If it happened in a different time, in a different place, and to a different kid, they would drop everything they were doing and glue themselves to their computer screens as if they were watching an episode of Game of Thrones. After my experience that night, I learned that human beings flock to violence just like junkies in desperate need of a fix. They search for it on the dark web, they buy it on discs, they read about it in books, and sometimes, if they are lucky, they even watch it unfold live on Twitch. In this way, I learned that we are all like the sadist. We might not act on our violent impulses, but we revel in them nonetheless. We need the Tanners of the world to suffer, for without them, what else is there to entertain us? This is why, my friends, the biggest stream of my career scarred me for life, and I will never stream again.